This video is brought to you by Envato. If you've ever dreamed of modeling in 3D and creating an eye-catching portfolio piece, then you're in the right place. So we'll start by introducing the basics of the Blender interface and then develop your skills step by step. You'll learn how to add 3D objects and manipulate them, teaching you all the different techniques to create these simple assets. We'll then move on to learning how to add color to each of our assets using materials, and then finally how to light and render our scene to create a stunning finished image. I'm Jonathan Lamb with Envato, and I'll be your guide through this Blender tutorial for beginners. Our adventure begins with downloading Blender, a free and open source 3D creation suite that's about to become your new favorite tool. Blender is not just any software. It's a comprehensive suite supporting the entire 3D pipeline, from modeling to animation, rendering to game creation. Blender has it all. So let's kick things off. Open your web browser and head over to www.blender.org. This is Blender's official website, the safest place to download the software. Look for the Download Blender button at the top. Clicking it will direct you to the latest, most stable version of Blender. Blender caters to all, available for Windows, macOS, and Linux. Select the version that matches your operating system to begin the download. After the download finishes, open the installer file and follow the on-screen instructions to install it. The process might take a few minutes, but it's worth the wait. Now that you have installed Blender, it's time to dive into the interface. First up, the 3D viewport. Blender's workspace might seem a bit overwhelming at first, but don't worry. We don't need to know what every button does, as we are just starting out. As we go through each chapter, we'll focus on only the most necessary things so that you can build up your knowledge step by step. First thing that we want to learn is navigating the viewport. First, let's rotate the view. Hold down the middle mouse button and move the mouse. The scene orbits around the central point, giving you a 360-degree perspective. It's like holding a camera and looking around. To pan the view, hold Shift on your keyboard and move the middle mouse button left and right. Scroll with the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. Alternatively, you can hold the Control and middle mouse button and move the mouse up and down to zoom. Focusing on an object centers it to your viewport. Select an object and press the numpad period button on your keyboard to snap your view to that object. This is incredibly useful for quickly navigating to specific parts of your scene. Another quick tip that might save you later on is using the home key on your keyboard, which will frame everything in your scene. You can find both of these options under View, which also has another useful option called Frame Selected that will do the same thing, but just for your selected object. Now, if we look further down under the viewpoint, you can see the different keyboard shortcuts for each of our main views, which is useful when we want to snap around to a top view or a side view. Getting used to the keyboard shortcuts will save you a lot of time in the long run. However, if you're struggling to remember, you can always go back to the View menu to jog your memory. Another way to navigate the viewport is by using the viewport gizmo at the top right here. You can see each axis is color-coded, which makes it easier to click on them and to switch views. You can also click and drag inside to rotate around the viewport. Use the hand icon to pan and the magnifying glass to zoom in and out using the mouse. To select your 3D objects, simply click on them with the left mouse button. Now, whatever you have selected in the viewport will also be highlighted up here, located in the top right, in what is called the outliner. Think of it as the table of contents for your scene. It lists all objects, cameras, lights, and more. Selecting an item here selects it in the 3D viewport as well. Now to select more than one object, simply hold down the Shift button on the keyboard and use the mouse to select them. In this scene, which is the default scene you get when you start Blender, you can see that we have a camera object. This is a virtual viewpoint from which your 3D scene will be rendered, which will be our still image or an animation video. To see through your camera's lens, click on the camera button here or press numpad 0. This switches to the camera view, showing you exactly what will be rendered. Now to get out of the camera view, just use the middle mouse button and just drag it and use it again as normal. And that's how you navigate the viewports in Blender. Practice these moves and explore your scenes from every angle. This video is brought to you by Envato, the largest unlimited creative subscription in the world. Find authentic graphics, templates, photos, and fonts. Click on the link to learn more. Blender makes it incredibly easy to start populating your scene with objects. We'll begin with the basics, adding the most common objects that you'll use. Now in your 3D viewport, right-click to make sure nothing is selected. Now press Shift A, and this brings up the Add menu, a gateway to all the objects that you can create. Now this is the same as selecting the Add menu on the top left here. You'll find everything from meshes like cubes and spheres to lights and cameras. Now let's start with the basic 3D objects which are under the Mesh menu. We'll add a sphere by going to Mesh and then Sphere. And as we look around the viewport, you can see that a sphere is highlighted, but it is right in the middle of the cube. This is because Blender adds new objects where your 3D cursor is placed. And we can move the 3D cursor by holding down Shift and right-clicking around the viewport, like so. Now, if we add a new 3D object, like a plane, you'll see that it's now placed where the 3D cursor is. Now that we know how to add objects, let's go ahead and learn how to move them. As you can see, we can no longer see the sphere in our scene, as it's not selected. So let's go ahead and select it from the outliner. Now that you know how to add objects, let's go ahead and learn how to move them. Now as you can see, our sphere is no longer selected, so let's go ahead and select it from the outliner. We can use the basic movement buttons on the left of the screen now to move our sphere. First, we have the Move button, and you'll see some basic movement arrows appear on our object for us to interact with here. Next, we have Rotate, which changes the gizmo so that we can rotate our object. And finally, we have Scale, which allows you to make your objects bigger or smaller. To duplicate an object, simply select the one that you want to make copies of and then press Shift and D on your keyboard. And then move it to where you need. This is a quick way to populate your scene. Before we close off this chapter, let's quickly make a basic scene out of these few objects. Okay, so let's start making a quick scene. We've got here a plane, a cube, and a sphere. So let's add some more objects to this scene. So I'm just going to press Shift A on the keyboard to bring up our Add menu. And we're going to add a cylinder. Shift A again. And let's add a cone. And Shift A again. And let's add one last object, which is this torus. And then every time we add these objects in, I simply go to our top view here just by clicking on the Z on this gizmo here. We can select our objects in this menu. So let's go ahead and move our torus by pressing G on the keyboard to grab. Just move it to the side. Just going to click on our cylinder here, press G again to grab, and then move it to the side. So now we can see all of our objects. Oh, and we've still got one cone here. So I'm just going to go to the top view here, press G to grab, and then move this. So moving our camera around and snapping them to the top view is a nice and easy way to see everything in that direction, or we can even go to the side view by going and clicking on the X here, like that. And that sort of helps when we grab our objects, as it restricts our movement to that particular plane. So if we were to go to our basic normal view, for example, if we press G, you know, we're not sure where our object is going in the scene. So if I move it over here, you can see that it's also moved it in the Z axis as well as the Y and the X. So let's go ahead and go back to our top view, move our cone back to the side, go back to our front view here, and then move this back down. Cool. So now let's go to this plane here, and we're going to use this as the floor. So I'm going to go to the top view here, press S on our keyboard to scale it, and just going to drag with the mouse to make this slightly bigger. And then going back to our front view here, we can now go ahead and move these objects on top of the plane. Now you can see the plane is on this green horizontal line here. So that means we need to move our objects just on top of this green horizontal line so that it is placed on the plane. So let's go ahead and do that. Again, by hitting G on the keyboard and then moving them onto the plane. And then if I hold the middle mouse button here and just go around our scene, you can see that our objects are now nicely placed on this plane. Excellent. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to move this torus, and I want to go ahead and rotate that. So I'm just going to go to the side view here by clicking on the Y. And if I grab our torus here, I can press R on the keyboard to rotate it. And if you want to rotate it at a particular angle, what we can do from here is we can also go ahead and press 90 on the keyboard to rotate it by 90 degrees. Click with your mouse to accept that. We can go ahead and place this back onto the plane. Great. And just like that, you've learned how to add, position, scale, rotate, duplicate, and delete objects with Blender. With these tools, you're well on your way to creating anything that you can imagine. Experiment with different objects and see what you can create. Now that we have our basic scene and some objects to play around with, it's time to bring them to life with colors using materials. With materials, they don't just add color to our objects, they also help define how our objects look under different lighting and from various angles, which is crucial for realistic and stylized scenes alike. Now, let's add some color to our creations. Materials in Blender can be as simple or as complex as you need, from solid colors to detailed textures. Today, we'll just focus on the basics, applying solid colors to our objects. Select the object that you want to add a material to by clicking on it. We'll use our trusty cube for this demonstration. With your object selected, go to the Properties panel on the right side of the screen. Click on the Materials Properties icon, which looks a little bit like a red checkered sphere. And then let's go ahead and add material by clicking on the New button. This creates a new material slot for your object. By default, Blender gives you a basic material, but let's go ahead and make it a little bit more interesting. So as we're creating a new material here using this new material slot, we can go ahead and remove the default material slot here by selecting it and then clicking on the Remove Material Slot button on the right here. So go ahead and create a new material by clicking on the Add New Material button here. And now you can see we've got all of these options over here to create our new material. But we won't worry too much about these options just yet. We just want to use the base color for now. So let's go ahead and click on the base color. and we can go ahead and change the color of our cube. Now you can see that our cube isn't changing color just yet, and that's because we are currently in the solid display view mode, and we want to move over to the other two modes, the material preview mode or the rendered preview mode, to see the colors. So let's go ahead and do that. So we just want to use the material preview mode here, and you can see straight away that our cube is now showing the color that we have assigned to it. So we can go ahead and change the colors of all of our objects here. So just creating a new material slot here, create a new material, and then just practicing creating some new materials for each of our objects. So again, just selecting the material, selecting the object, clicking on the add material slot here, creating a new material for that material slot, and then just adding a color for it. And then for each of these materials, you can go ahead and name them. So let's go ahead and name this material pink. And then each time you create a new material, you'll see the material populate under this drop down box here. So if we wanted this cone to have the same material as this blue cylinder here, all we have to do is select the cone, go under the material drop down box here, and select this blue material. Excellent. And if we ever wanted to change the material or the color of our object, all we have to do is just select our object and then go down into this drop down menu and select the material that we want to use, like so. So let's go ahead and change this to the red material. So now that we know how to create materials for our objects, let's go ahead and take a look at roughness and metalness, what it means and why it's important. So I've quickly added a background HDRI in our scene here, just so we can see how light affects our objects. And I'm going to demonstrate on this yellow cube here how roughness controls the shininess or how matte it appears on the surface. So let's go ahead and go back to our material tab here. And if we go ahead and go to the roughness slider, if I slide this down, you can see how the light is now reflecting off the surface of our cube. And if I slide this up, you can see now the light is becoming more and more scattered and is becoming more and more matte on the surface. So this is how you can control the roughness of the material. The next slider here is the metallic slider, and this controls how metallic your surface will appear. So we can use this in combination with the roughness. So let's go ahead and slide the roughness value all the way down. And as we slide the metallic values up, you can see how now our cube is appearing more and more metallic.
Every great scene needs great lighting. Lighting in Blender helps set the mood, emphasizes textures, and adds depth. Then, rendering turns our 3D scene into a final image or animation that we can share. Let's start with the lighting. Blender has several types of lights, but today we'll focus on the three main types: point, sun, and area. Let's add a point light which emits light in all directions, just like a light bulb. Now we already have a point light in our scene by default, but it's useful to learn how to create it manually. First, let's delete the default point light. Then go to the 3D viewport, press Shift A, select light, and then point. Click to place it in your scene. You can move it around and see how it affects shadows and highlights.
Now we're not quite seeing the effect of the light in our scene here, so let's go ahead and move it closer to one of our objects, like this cube here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the object data properties panel here, and we're going to play about with some of these settings. So you can see we can change the color of our light, but we can also change the power and the radius. So let's go ahead and increase the power of our light. And hopefully you can see here how the light is affecting our cube or the shapes around it. So let's go ahead and move it a little bit closer to the cube, and you can see slightly how some of the shadows are starting to move about. Now if we go ahead and increase the radius here, we can see how that now is starting to affect our shapes and the surrounding area even further. So that's how we can go ahead and change the properties of our light, and you can see how that's affecting our sphere there and our other objects, just like that. And we can also see how changing the type of light will affect the way our scene will work. So if we change it from a point light to a spotlight, you can see now if I go ahead and use this and move our spotlight around, you can see how that is now affecting our scene. We can also go ahead and change the direction of where our spotlight is pointing. So we can go ahead and do that. Just like this. And again, we're going to need to increase the strength of our light in order to see how that is working. We can also change it to an area light. And let's move this closer to our objects so you can see how that works. And if you want to change the direction of the light, simply go ahead and select this yellow circle here. And you can go ahead and use your mouse to move it to point into the direction that you want it to point in. So if I go back to our side view here, you can see how that is affecting where our light is shining, like that. And it's the same with the spotlight. So we can go ahead and change the direction of the spotlight is pointing at just by using this yellow circle here. Now, in order to see how the light affects our scene, we need to be either in material preview mode or rendered view. Since we're looking at the different modes at the top here, I think now is a good time to go through each of them so that we can get a quick understanding of what they are. Wireframe mode allows you to see your scene as a mesh of lines. This mode is great for understanding the structure of your models and ensuring accuracy in editing, though it doesn't display any lighting effects. Next is solid mode, the default shading. It gives a general idea of the form and depth without the distractions of textures or lighting. It's perfect for modeling and sculpting. For a hint of how materials and some lighting will look, switch to the material preview. It's fast and useful for designing and tweaking materials under approximate lighting conditions. And finally, rendered view shows your scene with full lighting, materials and effects as they would appear in your final render. It's essential for understanding the full impact of your lighting choices. Eevee is Blender's real-time render engine, offering speed and efficiency, making it ideal for quick previews and projects with tight deadlines. Cycles, on the other hand, is a ray-traced render engine known for its accuracy and realism, especially in simulating lighting and shadows, but at the cost of longer render times. So now that our scene is lit, it's time to render it. Rendering is like taking a photo of your 3D scene. To start, go to the render menu at the top. You'll see that in this mode, Blender automatically goes into your camera view so that you can see what you're going to render. To start the render, select Render Image. Blender will now process the scene and present the rendered image. Now this might take a moment depending on the complexity of your scene and your computer's overall power. Once your image has finished rendering and you're happy with the way that it looks, to save it, go to Image and select either Save or Save As. And there you have it. Now you know the very basics of how to use Blender. Now that we understand the basics of Blender, let's get going with the exciting part of this course. Creating this cool little low poly scene here, we'll be using simple cubes transformed into wooden planks to construct these walls. This modular approach not only makes our treehouse customizable, but also teaches us a lot about working efficiently in Blender. So let's start building. We'll begin by shaping our basic cube into a wooden plank. This plank will serve as the fundamental building block for our treehouse walls. So to begin, let's go ahead and hide our camera from the scene and our light, as we're not going to be using those. And then I'm going to press N on the keyboard so that you can see the dimensions we're working with if you want to follow along exactly. Now with the cube selected here, I'm going to press S on the keyboard, which will allow us to scale it. And then I'm going to go ahead and press X on the keyboard so that we can scale it in just the X dimension here. So I'm just going to make our cube a little bit thinner, like so. And then I'm going to repeat the process. I'm going to press S on the keyboard, and then I'm going to press Y on the keyboard here. And you can see we've got this green line highlighted, which means we are scaling in the Y direction here. So I'm just going to make our wooden plank a little bit longer, like so. So once you're happy with the shape of your wooden plank, the next thing we want to do is we want to add a material to it, which will be the color for our wooden plank. So go ahead and go to the materials tab here. And over here, we're going to rename the current material, which is this basic gray material, to wooden plank. And over here, we've got the base color, and we want to change this base color to something like a brown. So you can go ahead and use the color wheel here. Now you can see that the color is not being reflected on our wooden plank, and that's because we are currently in viewport shading mode. So we want to go to this one here, which is viewport shading, instead of this one here, which is the solid display mode. We want to go to the material preview mode. So let's go ahead and select that, and you can see now that our color is being reflected. So we can go ahead and color it whatever we want. So we want something like that, or we can go ahead and go to the hex, and the color that we're going to use here is a hex code of C4744A. And then once you've got that done, we're going to duplicate this wooden plank to create the wall. So go ahead and press Shift D to duplicate it, and we're going to restrain the movement to Z. So go ahead and press Z afterwards, and you can see we can only move it in the Z axis. So we can press Shift D again and then Z, and then continue to do that until we've got the height of the wall that we want. Or to make things a little bit easier and also to learn some modifiers, we're going to select our plank here, and then we're going to go over to the modifiers tab. We're going to add modifier, go to generate and select array, and this will go ahead and allow us to duplicate our planks like so. So we want to make sure that the factor is set to 0 for the factor of x, and we want the factor of z here, let's go ahead and increase the count to something like 1.1. And you can see now that we are starting to build the height of our wall. And all we have to do here is increase the count
to make it. So I'm just going to make the count something like 5. And then once you're happy with the height of your wall, the next thing we want to do is we want to create the back plane for our wall so that we don't have these holes inside our wall. So when we're rendering it, the light doesn't shine through. So I'm going to do a Shift D to duplicate our plank. I'm going to press X to make sure that we're duplicating it on the X-axis. From there, with our new duplicate selected, I'm just going to remove the array and I'm going to scale it in the Z-axis. So press S and then Z. And then we're just going to scale it up here like so. And I'm just going to go into our side view here by clicking on the Y-axis on this little gizmo. And I'm going to press G on the keyboard to grab it and move it into place. So it's just going to be a little bit higher and a little bit lower here from our wall, and we can also make it thinner. So press S and then press X to scale it like that, make it a little bit thinner, and it's just going to move it into place like that. Cool. Now you can also see the letters of what I'm pressing on the top left corner of the screen here. So when I'm pressing S, you can see the scale. You can see the numbers of the scale on the top left. And then if I press X, you can see that it's only scaling along the global X like that. Okay. So now that we've got our basic wall finished, the next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and create the structural beam for our treehouse. So I'm just going to go ahead and press Shift A on the keyboard to add a new mesh. I'm just going to add a new cube like so, and I'm just going to move it into place. So press G on the keyboard to grab, then press Y. I'm going to move it along the Y-axis to this side of the wall. Then I'm going to scale it slightly. So I'm just going to scale it down like this. And then I'm going to press S and Z to make it longer. So I'm just going to press the X over here to go into our side view, our front view. I'm just going to make sure that this is all lined up. Press S and Z again to increase the height of this beam. And then just making sure it's in place, I'm going to go to the top view here by pressing or clicking on the Z here. I'm just going to press G on the keyboard to move that into place, making sure it's all centered. And then from there, we're going to go ahead and add a material. So make sure that this cube is selected. Go to Materials, go to New, and we're going to name this material Wooden Pole. And this color here is going to be a slightly darker brown. So we can go ahead and make this brown a little bit darker, like that. And then once that's done, go ahead and select your wooden wall here. We're going to create a modular wall. So to do that, we want to make sure that all of these elements are joined and grouped together. So right now we've got a modifier selected or applied here. We're going to apply that. So to do that, we're going to select the wall, go to our modifier tab, go to array, go to this drop down menu here, and then hit apply. And that will mean that this modifier has now been applied to this wall. We're going to select all of our objects here and then press Ctrl J to join it. So now all of our objects are now grouped together. So you can see when we press G, we can move it all at the same time. And when we select it, it selects everything as one object. So let's go ahead and rename this in our collection Wooden Wall. Excellent. So now that we've got our first modular wooden wall ready, let's go ahead and create the other walls to make up our wooden house. Now to do this, I'm just going to head over to the top view here to make working a little bit easier. And I'm going to press Shift D on the keyboard to duplicate our wall. And then I'm going to press R and 90 to rotate it. Let's go ahead and press G on the keyboard to go ahead and grab this and place it roughly around here. And I want to go ahead and extend the wall so that our house is a little bit longer on the side here. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to head over to edit mode. I'm going to go over to our side view here, go to wireframe mode here, and what we're going to do is we're going to select the vertex selection, make sure that we've got our select box mode here, and we're just going to highlight all of these vertices like so. And then making sure we're in the side view here, we're just going to press S to scale it. In fact, not scale, we're just going to press G to grab them. And then we're going to press X to move them along the X-axis like so. And we're just going to move them along to roughly around there. So I'm just going to go back to solid display mode to make sure that it all looks correct. Perfect. Now let's go ahead and go back into object mode, and we're going to continue rotating these so that we've got the rest of the wall for our house. So I'm just going to select this first front wall here, go over to our top view again, press Shift D to duplicate it, and this time I'm going to press R 180 to rotate it 180 degrees, and then I'm just going to press G on the keyboard to move this into place roughly around there. Go ahead and duplicate this wall, press R 180, and then doing the same thing, press G and moving this into place like so. And then once you've done that, we can press the middle mouse button to move around our wall, making sure everything looks correct. And once you're happy with that, what we're going to do is we're going to press and create the top and bottom floors for our house. So press Shift A to add a new cube like so. I'm just going to go back to the top view, press G on the keyboard to move this cube into place, and we're just going to press S on the keyboard to scale it like so, and then press S and X to scale it in this direction. So I'm just going to go back over here, press S and Z to scale it down. So S and Z to make it a little bit thinner. And then I'm just going to go to the side view and move this up, press G, and then move it up into place like so. And then just moving around the house, just making sure this all looks correct. So you can see in our front view that it's a little bit wonky over there. Just going to scale it a little bit more, just making it a little bit smaller. And then just moving it into place. So checking the sides, making sure it's all balanced. And then checking the front. And then this looks pretty decent to me. And then once you're happy with the way that looks, let's go ahead and duplicate this. Now before we duplicate it, we're going to go into the material preview mode and add a color to this. So to add a color, we're just going to go to the material panel here, and we're going to go to the drop down menu here and select the wooden pole, and you'll see that it automatically adds the same color as the pole. So let's go ahead and press Shift D to duplicate it, and then Z to duplicate it in the Z axis, and then just move that down like so. So now we've got one floor of our house. And if we want to make multiple floors, let's go ahead and select all of these, press Shift D to duplicate, and then press Z to move that up. Now we won't need this bottom floor here. And then just going back to our solid mode here so we can see what we're doing. Press G and Z on the keyboard and move that into place. So now you can see we've got 2 floors of our house, like so. Now for this one, I think this is a little bit too tall for our house. So if you want to go ahead and remove some planks, we can do that. So let's go ahead and go to edit mode. And then what we want to do from here is we want to go ahead and delete the first layer of our planks. And to do this, we want to go to select mode for our faces. And then just go ahead and select one face here, and then press Control, and then on the numpad, press the plus button a few times to go ahead and grow the selection and make sure it's selected all of the faces for that particular plank. Press delete and then select faces to delete that plank. And we'll go ahead and do the same for the other planks here. So let's go ahead and press Tab on our keyboard to go back to object mode. Select our next wall, press Tab again to go to edit mode. We're just going to select the first face for this one, press Control and then the plus button on the numpad a few times, making sure that we've selected all of the faces of this plank, as you can see from here, and then press delete on the keyboard and then faces again. And we're just going to repeat the process. Press Tab on the keyboard to go back into object mode, select our next wall, press Tab again to go to edit mode, select all the faces here, press delete, and then select faces. Go back to object mode, select this next wall, go back to edit mode, and then select all of the faces here, and then press delete and faces. Cool. Then once we've done that, what we can do from here is we can go ahead and go back to object mode. We're going to select all of the objects here and then press Ctrl J to join all of the objects into one group. Go ahead and go into our side view. We're going to go to wireframe mode, go back to edit mode, and this time I want to select the vertices. I'm going to select all of the vertices at the bottom here, press G and then Z to move them in the Z axis. Just going to move them up slightly like so to shorten the height of these walls. Then you're just going to go back into solid mode, go back into object mode, and now you can see that our top floor is a little bit shorter. So let's press G and Z and then move this back into place like so.
And there you have it, a modular wall made of horizontal wooden planks for your treehouse. Using the same techniques of transforming basic cubes into wooden planks, we'll create the windows and the door to our treehouse. We'll start by shaping basic cubes into smaller wooden planks, just like what we did for the walls. These planks will form the framework for our windows and the door.
Now before we go ahead and make the windows for our treehouse, let's go ahead and tidy things up by grouping these all together. So let's go ahead and highlight all of our walls here, press M on our keyboard and then select new collection, and let's call this selection walls. Click OK, and then over on this panel here you can see that all of our walls have now been grouped together in this selection collection like so. Cool. Next, let's go ahead and create the window. So let's go to our front view here, press Shift A on the keyboard, and let's create a new cube. Let's go ahead and move this into place. Press S on the keyboard to scale this down, and then press S and then Y to scale this along the Y-axis like so. Now before we do anything else, let's go ahead and go to our material preview mode here, and we're going to add a new material
So let's go ahead and create a new material like this. And let's name this wooden window. And we're going to create a new color. This time it's going to be maybe slightly lighter than the brown of our wall. Something like that. And then let's go back into our solid mode here and then continue making the window. So let's go back to our front view, press Shift D to duplicate it, press Z to move this in the Z axis, then press Shift D and then press R90 to rotate it by 90 degrees, and then let's move that into place like so. So I'm just going to move these a little bit higher and a little bit lower to make some room for this plank here, and then press Shift D and then Y to move this along like that, and then press G and then Y to move that along. And in fact, let's go ahead and make this bottom and top plank a little bit longer. So press S and then Y to make them slightly longer, like so. And then let's go ahead and select these two planks here and then press S and then X to make them slightly thinner, like that. Cool. Next, let's go ahead and make the cross section for our window. So all we're going to do from here is we're going to duplicate one of these planks. So press Shift D and then move that into the middle. And I'm just going to press S and then Y to make that a little bit thinner, like so. And then let's go ahead and press S and then X to make that thinner over here, like that. Let's go back to our front view and then press Shift D, R and then 90 to rotate that, and then press S and then Y to make that a little bit shorter, like that. Cool. And then once you're happy with the way that looks, let's go ahead and select all of these objects here. I'm just going to move them away from my house for now. And what we need to do is we need to make the actual window pane behind the window as well. So let's go ahead and do that. First, let's go ahead and make this a little bit thinner. So press S and then X. S and then X to make that thinner, like that. Just so that they're not overlapping each other. And in fact, we're just going to duplicate this. So press Shift D and then X to duplicate that. And then over in our side view, we're going to press S and then Z to go ahead and scale this up like that. Then press G to move that into place. Then now you can see we've got our window pane. So in fact, let's press G and then X to move that slightly forwards. And we're going to need a new material for the window. So let's go ahead and select that. We're going to delete the wooden window material. Press the new material button here. I'm just going to press glass. Name this glass. And let's go ahead and make a blue color for this for now. Cool. And then once you're happy with the way this looks, let's go ahead and select all of our window objects apart from the glass. Press Shift J to join it. And now let's go ahead and select this and then press M and let's move this to a window collection. So we're just going to make a new window collection. And then once we've done that, let's go ahead and move that into place. So I'm just going to move this window up here, like so. And then press G and X to move that at the top here, like that. And then we're just going to duplicate this window. So press Shift D to duplicate it.
And then we're going to go ahead and go over to our top view here. Press R90 to rotate it, and then move that into place. So let's go ahead and move that into place. So it's just G and Y to move that there. Press Shift D to duplicate it, and then X to move that along here. So I'm just going to go over to our side view to make sure that this looks correct. And then let's go ahead and press Shift D and have a window at the bottom here, like that. So we can go ahead and create more windows for the rest of our house. So let's go ahead and select the windows again, making sure that we've selected all these planes. And then let's go ahead and press Shift D to duplicate, R180 to flip them around, and then just move these into place. So G and then Y to move that along. And then going over to our view here, our side view, making sure that that's all looking correct. G and Y to sink that further into the house, but making sure that our window are seen. Cool. Next, let's go ahead and create the door for our house. Moving back into solid mode, we're just going to go ahead and press Shift A and create a new cube. Let's go back into our front view here, and we're just going to go ahead and scale this down, and then press S and then Z to scale this up to create a wooden plank like so. And let's go ahead and maybe scale this a little bit thinner. So press S and X to make this a little bit thinner, like so. And then we're just going to go ahead and duplicate this along. So to do that, let's go back to our modifiers, add a modifier, an array modifier like so. And then we're going to make sure that this is duplicated in the right axis, so not a factor, not the X factor here. We want to make sure it's along the Y. So we're going to go ahead and make the Y, let's say 1.1. See what that looks like. Looks fine. And then over here, let's go back into front view. And let's go ahead and duplicate the wooden plank. So press Control D. And again, before we go ahead and duplicate it, we want to go ahead and add a material. So we're just going to go back to the material panel. And then again, using the drop down box here, we're going to use the wooden window material to make the color for our door. So now that when we duplicate it, you can see our duplicate also has the material on it. So let's press Shift D to duplicate it, and we're going to remove the array modifier. Press R90 and then just move that into place. Press S, Y to scale this a little bit down, and if you want to make sure that the scale is a little bit more accurate, you can also hold Shift on the keyboard to do it in smaller increments. So S, Shift on the keyboard, holding Shift, and then just moving it down like that. Seeing what that looks like, I'm just going to make this a little bit thinner. So press S and then X, or a little bit thicker, sorry. And then let's go ahead and duplicate that. Press Shift D and then Z to move that down. And then now we're going to create the door handle. So let's go ahead and press Shift D and then Z. I'm going to press R90 to rotate it, and then S to scale this right down, SZ to make this shorter, and then just going to move that into place. Press G and then X to move that into place like so. And if we go into solid mode, you can see a little bit clearly more clearly what I'm doing here. And then we're going to add a new material for this door handle. So let's go back to the material mode. And then let's go ahead and remove this wooden window material. Create a new material here. And let's name this door handle. And let's make this a grey or a light grey material, like so. In fact, we may reuse this material again, so let's just name this metal, like that. Cool. So now that we've got our door, let's go ahead and select all our door objects, press Ctrl J to join them, and then you can see that suddenly our door modifier has been removed. So make sure that we apply the modifier first before we join it. So let's go back to our modifiers, go back to this drop down box, click on apply, and now if we go ahead and select all of our door objects, press Ctrl J, you can see that now that has worked correctly, and then we can move our door into position, like so. Cool. And then we can go ahead and scale this up a little bit and move this down.
And there you have it. Windows and a door for your treehouse, created from basic wooden planks. Hopefully you can see how powerful basic object transformation can be when creating your 3D structures. Now you can see our treehouse is starting to take shape using our modular pieces. All that's left to finish it off is to create the roof.
Now before we go ahead and create the roof for our house, you can see that I've made some adjustments to the walls by extending them slightly, giving us some extra room to work with. Now we used the same techniques as what we did previously, just going into edit mode for our wall, and then using the wireframe mode here and selecting our vertices to extend them in the Y direction or the X direction that you can see here, like so. So if I go ahead and undo those changes, and let's go ahead and move our door into position. So pressing G on the keyboard, moving that into position like so, and then moving that slightly forwards in the X direction. And let's go ahead and move this into its own collection. So press M on the keyboard, go to new collection, and then let's name this door, just to keep things nice and tidy, like so. Cool. Now let's go ahead and create the roof. So in order to do that, I'm just going to select one of our walls here. I'm going to press Ctrl D to duplicate it. And I'm just wanting to grab one of the planks here. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and go into edit mode, and we're going to delete all of the other planks. So select them by pressing Control on the keyboard, selecting it with your mouse, and then pressing the plus button on the numpad a few times to select all of those objects, and then press delete faces until you're left with just one plank. And then from there, what I want to do is I want to rotate it. So R, and then press Z to rotate it in the Z axis, and then press 90, like so. And then from here, I'm going to go into our side view mode here, and then press R and then 90, so that we've got a nice long length of wooden plank here. Now let's press S and then Z to make it slightly shorter. And then let's go ahead and duplicate this a few times. So if I move this into place like so, I'm going to add a new modifier. So go to the modifier tab here, and then generate an array, and then make sure that we are generating it in the right axis, so not in the X axis. We want to generate this in the z-axis like so. So making sure this is 1.1. Let's just move this into place. And let's go ahead and create a few more of these planks so that we're filling up the space here for our roof. Like so. I'm just going to move this into place. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to add some wooden planks for our roof, some support beams. So let's go ahead and press Alt and right click on our mouse. So Shift and right click on the mouse, sorry, to move this global cursor here. And then we're going to press Shift A and then create a cube. Now the reason why I moved our global cursor is wherever you place this is where your new object is going to be created. So I just wanted the cube to be created here. And then with that cube selected, press S on the keyboard to scale it down. Just going to move into the side view here and then press S and then Z to scale this up. S and Z, and then move that into position like so. So S and Z to make it slightly taller. And then over on our top view here, I want to make sure, so just move this to the side so you can see what I'm doing. Just want to make sure that this support beam is in the middle, like so. And then again, we want to make sure that we've got a material selected for this. So go over to the materials tab, you move our drop down box and then choose wooden pole like that. And then whenever we duplicate it, we've got a duplicate of the color as well. So duplicate and move over to the side. And then from there, what we want to do is we want to press Shift D again, press R90. I'm just going to go back to solid mode so we can see a little bit more clearly what we're doing. Press G, move that into place, press S and then X to scale this along the X-axis. And then I'm just going to scale this a little bit larger so there's no overlapping of polygons. So let's make this a little bit larger like that. And then press S and then X to scale this back down again. Like so. Cool. So now that we've got the side of our roof here like so, I'm just going to duplicate this pole here, as this will act as the middle of our roof. And then after that, we're just going to select all of our objects here, press Ctrl J to join them up. And then let's go ahead and move this into place. So I'm just going to move that over here and going over to our front view. Let's move that over there. And then we want to rotate this. I'm just going to press R to rotate. And let's go ahead and rotate this like so. So moving this central wooden pole here. Now this central wooden pole needs to be a little bit thicker. So I'm just going to scale this up a little bit. And then move that into place, making sure it's in the middle. And then once you're happy with the way that this roof is looking, what we can do from there is we can use the mirror modifier. So in fact, these objects haven't been joined yet. So let's make sure all of these objects has been joined. Press Ctrl J to join them. Again, we need to make sure that the modifier has been applied. So let's go back to the modifier tab and apply that. Select all the objects again and then press Ctrl J to join them up. Now once we've done that, let's go ahead and go back to the modifier tab, generate, and now let's go ahead and find mirror. So mirror should be here. Yes, so under generate, mirror, and then using the eyedropper tool here, we want to click on that and then select our middle
pole here, and then we want to select Y and deselect X. And now you can see we've got two sides of our roof, like so. Excellent. Next, we want to go ahead and add the middle part of our roof. So I'm just going to, again, duplicate this wall here, press Shift D and then Z to move this up, G and Z. And then going back into edit mode, I'm just going to select all of the faces that we don't need for our roof. So I'm just going to delete those. And then let's go back to object mode, press G, Z, and then move this back down again. So just about here. And in fact, we don't need this top panel here as well. So you go back to edit mode. So either pressing tab on the keyboard or just using this drop down box here. Make sure you've got faces select mode selected. And we're going to select all of these faces here by pressing Control and then the plus key on the numpad. Then press delete and then faces. And then whilst we're in edit mode here, we can also go ahead and change the sizes of our wooden planks. In fact, we don't need, let's see if we can do this in object mode. So, oh no, we'll need to go to edit mode because we need to do these individually. So let's go ahead and select the top panel here, press Control and the plus key on the numpad, and then press S and then Y to scale this down, like so. And you can see that we still have a little bit of a plank just sticking out here like that. So what we can do is we can use the vertices mode here, go over to wireframe mode, make sure we've got both of these selected, and then press S to scale and then Y again to go ahead and scale them like that. So let's go ahead and do this for all of them. So let's go ahead and select all of these vertices here for the next one. Press S and Y to move them along, and then just the top vertices here, press S and Y to scale them down. Let's do it for the next one here. Ooh, so make sure we've selected just the vertices just by holding Shift and then selecting the next ones again. Like that. And then press S and Y. And then just these vertices here, holding Shift and then selecting the next one, S and Y, like that. And then just these top ones here, S and Y. And there we go. So if we go back to solid mode, you can see that our roof has been successfully created. And we can also go ahead and use the mirror modifier for this. So let's go ahead and go to generate mirror. Select the middle object here, that middle pole, and this time we want to go and select Z and deselect X. And here you can see that we've got a nice one here. Now in fact it's slightly off center because this pole is off center. So let's go ahead and delete this mirror. And instead, let's go ahead and duplicate this. So press Shift D to duplicate, and then X to move it along the X-axis. And then we can just manually place it here, like that. And then we can go ahead and duplicate this floor here. So go ahead and press Shift D to duplicate it, and then Z to move it up, like that. Cool. And in fact, let's go ahead and make sure that these poles are not overlapping. Just going to select these poles here. So let's go ahead and select all of these and select all of these. In fact, it's mirrored, so we don't need to select that. Press S and then X, scale them a little bit, and there we go. So now we've got our roof for our house. So now that we've got our roof created, if we go ahead and zoom in a little closer here, you can see that between the gaps of our wooden planks, there's still some holes that need to be filled, unlike the walls of our house, where we created a inner wall so that there's no holes inside. So we need to do the same for our roof as well. So let's go ahead and hide the walls, the windows, and our door. And the first thing we want to do here is we want to go ahead and select our roof. We want to go into edit mode, and I want to go ahead and extract one of these planks because it has the right angle that we want to work with. So in order to do that, I'm going to go ahead and go to the face select mode, select one of these planks here, and pressing Control and the plus button on the numpad a few times, I want to make sure to select just that plank. I'm just going to hit G on the keyboard to make sure that I've got that. And then I'm going to right click on this, and let's go ahead and separate it by selection. So now that we've done that, if we go back into object mode, you will see that this is a separate object to the rest of the roof. So now if we go ahead and press Control or Shift D on the keyboard to duplicate it, and then just move it aside on the X-axis, we've now successfully extracted that plank. So once we've done that, let's go ahead and select our roof again, and then press Control J to make sure that, in fact, let's select that, and then select the roof, and then press Control J to make sure we've combined that roof into one object again. Cool. So now that we've got this, let's go ahead and remove the mirror modifier just so that we can focus on this plank here. If we go over to our front view, we want to move this plank into the inside or just below our roof. So in fact, if we go into wireframe mode here, see if we can see what that looks like. So just go and select our plank. So select the plank here, and we just want it just below the other wooden planks there. Press S to scale. I'm just going to scale it up slightly so that it fills up the space. And if I zoom in here, you can see that we've got these wooden planks in the inside. We just want to make sure that it's on the same plane. So going back into our solid mode here, we can now go into side view, and we want to press G and X to move this into position, just into the center of our roof here, and then press S to scale, X to scale on the X-axis, and then S to scale and X just to fill in the rest of the roof. So S and X to make sure it's the right size. And you can see how we've now filled in those holes successfully. Cool. Next, we want to do the same for the other side of the roof, which we can do easily by adding the mirror modifier again. So make sure that that object has been selected. Go to Add Modifier, Generate, Mirror. Use the eyedropper tool to select this top object here, and then deselect X, and then select Y. And then now you can see we've added the second part of our roof to fill in those holes. Excellent. Now we'll need to do the same for the front and back of our roof. So to do this, we can easily do that by adding a new cube. So press Shift and the right mouse button here to change where our 3D cursor is. And we just want to add a cube. So Shift A to add a cube into that particular place. So I'm just going to move that into the center here. And I'm just going to press S to scale, and then scale in the X-axis to make this a little bit thinner. Go back into our front view, and then I'm just going to scale this up slightly, and then move this into position. Now you can see that our roof is a triangle shape, so we're going to need to go back into edit mode to do the same thing. So let's go ahead and select the vertices here, go to wireframe mode so that we can select both the front and back vertices. And let's go ahead and just grab those front top two vertices here, press G and then Z, or just G and then Z to move them up, and then S, and let's go ahead and press Y to scale them down like that. And then the same with these bottom two vertices, so G and Z to move them down, and then S and then Y to scale them like so. So G and Z, just to make sure that they're in the right angle. And now hopefully if we go back into solid display mode, you can see that it is the right shape. So let's go back into object mode and press S to scale and then X to make this thinner again. So S and X, just making it thinner, and then press G to move it and X to move it in the X direction. And now if we go ahead and reintroduce the other parts of our roof, hopefully we can go ahead and move this into place. So just slightly behind the wooden planks. So now you can see we filled in those holes, and we're going to have to do the same thing for the back. So let's go ahead and go into side view, press Shift D to duplicate, press X to move it in the X axis, and then just slowly moving it so that it's just behind the wooden planks, like so. Excellent. Now, if we go back into our materials mode, we want to make sure that these planks are, or these objects are the same color as our wooden planks. So let's go ahead and remove the roof here, or remove the windows and the walls, just so that we can see this color. So let's select one of these, go to the material, and in the drop down box here, let's go ahead and select wooden plank. And we want to do the same for this one. Select wooden plank. Cool. And now as we introduce everything else, you can see we have successfully filled in those holes for our roof. Perfect.
And there you have it. With our roof created, we now have a complete wooden treehouse that we can use for our 3D illustration. Now that we've completed the wooden treehouse, we can further expand on the building using the modular pieces that we've just created.
Now, before we go ahead and add a wooden deck and some fences to our scene, let's go ahead and increase the size of our house and make it a little bit more interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into front view here, and I'm going to select the top half of our house, and then press Shift D to duplicate it, and then move it to the side here. I'm going to go into top view here. I'm going to press R90 to rotate it, and then just sort of slot that into place like so. And then go back into our side view here, and then press G and then Z, and then move that down to the bottom like that. And then maybe let's go ahead and move this a little bit more into the side like that. Cool. So now we've got a little bit of an expansion to our home. We can actually delete these windows here, as we won't need them. And maybe we can go ahead and add a new window over here. So rotate 90, or rotate Z 180, and then just move that into place. G and Y, just move that there like that. Cool.
For the next part of this lesson, we'll create the fence around the platform. This is not only for safety, creating smaller objects like this is a great way of creating a sense of scale to the image. We'll add more objects like this, such as the lamp and some stones, as we move further along the course.
So now we've got a little expansion for our house. The next thing we want to do is we want to add some wooden planks or a wooden deck for our house to sit on. So I'm just going to press Shift and right. Let's go to the top view actually. Then Shift and right click for our 3D cursor to be placed over here. And this is where our new cube is going to be created. So press Shift A and then Mesh and then Cube to create our cube. And I'm just going to go ahead and zoom in here and scale this up slightly. So these wooden planks are going to be a little bit bigger. And then I'm just going to press S and then X to scale this in the X axis. I'm just going to press G to move this along here, maybe a little bit shorter. Then going back into our 3D view here, press S and Z to make this a little bit thinner, like that. And then once you're happy with the way that this wooden plank looks, we're going to add an array modifier to this. So go to the modifiers tab, go to add modifier, generate and array, and make sure that the X factor is placed at 0, and we want the Y to be placed at 1.1, like that. And then all we need to do is increase the count of our wooden deck until you're happy with the way that it looks. Excellent. So what we'll do from there is we'll go ahead and press G and then Z to move this down. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and create some wooden fences. So again, go to the top view. And I'm just going to press Shift and left click or right click on our mouse to move our 3D cursor over there. Press Shift A and then cube. And this will create a cube here. Press S to scale this down. And then press S and then Z to scale this along the Z axis like that. So I'm just going to go into top view. Just going to move that up, and this will act as our wooden pole for our fence. Let's go to the materials tab, go back to our material preview mode, and let's add some materials to our new objects. So select the wooden deck here. I'm just going to go and create new, and we'll name this wooden deck. And then the color for this is going to be, if we go into the hex tab here, is going to be 9F8453. And then for our wooden pole here, let's go ahead and select that. You can go to the drop down menu here and then just select wooden pole. Cool. Let's go back to our solid mode and let's duplicate this. So I'm just going to go to our side view here, press Shift D to duplicate, press R90 to rotate that, and then just go ahead and slot that in over there. And then we're going to scale this. So if we go into our top view here, press S and then Y to make this a little bit thinner, like that. Then we can actually go ahead and press G and X to move that slightly. And in fact, let's go ahead and duplicate this pole here first. So go to our side view, and then we're going to go to the modifiers panel here, go to add modifier, generate array, And this time, let's go ahead and keep the factor, the X factor here, and we're going to increase this value slightly, like so. In fact, we want to go into the negative value. So let's go to negative or -5 or -4, and then just increase the counts until it fills your deck. Let's make this -3.5, like that, or -3.8, just playing about with the values here until you're happy with that. And then I'm going to move that, press G and X, and move that more into the center. And then for this pole here, let's go ahead and just scale this. So press S and then X to scale along. GX, just going to move that into the center. S and X to scale that, like so. Now you can see we've got a nice wooden fence. Cool. Now let's go ahead and select both of those objects. Go to our top view here. Press Shift D to duplicate, and then Y to move that along the Y axis, and then move that to the other side. And then press Shift D to duplicate that. And then in our top view, we can just press R90 to rotate it 90 degrees, and then just move that into place, like so. Cool. Now we might need to make some adjustments to this, so let's go ahead and select our fence here. We're going to change the count down to 15. Just go to our back view here, and now just move that like so in the y-axis, and then let's go ahead and scale this down. So S to scale, Y like that, G, Y to move it, and S, Y again to scale it up, like that. Cool. So now we've got a wooden fence and a deck. Now before we move on, I just want to adjust our wooden fence a little bit more. So just go to the top view here. I'm going to select the back of our fence, and I'm just going to align our fence here so that the back intersects with our fence here, like that. And then from there, let's go ahead and select our fence again. Press G and then Y to move it along so that it's centered. And then press S and Y to scale it along like that. And now you can see our wooden fence has a nice intersection like that. So it looks like it's all connected. Cool. Now you may want to reduce the count of the back fence again. So just making that count a little bit less. Press G and Y just to give our fence a little bit more space and breathing room, and maybe just increase the number value here to make it a little bit more spaced out. So G and Y again, and there you go.
Awesome! Now that our treehouse has a platform to sit on, our image is really starting to take shape. Now with this next section, we'll finish up our treehouse by creating some stairs and a cool little lamp object. Once this is done, we'll be ready to learn some new techniques to create the rest of the scene.
Now before we go ahead and create anything else, let's do a little bit of tidying up. So let's select the deck here, press M, and let's move this to a new collection and call this wooden deck. Click OK to move that. And then let's go ahead and select our fences. Just holding Shift on the keyboard to select multiple objects, like so. And then press M on the keyboard, select new selection here, and let's call this wooden fences. Click OK. And now you can see we've got all of our new collections like so. And then let's go ahead and do the same for our roof. So let's select all of our objects here that make up our roof. You can see that like that. And then press M, press new collection, and then let's call this roof, and then click OK. Excellent. So now we've got all of our new objects all tidied up in their own collections. Let's go ahead and create the wooden lamp. So I'm just going to go to our top view here, press Shift and then the right mouse button to move our 3D cursor over here. And I'm going to press Shift A to add a new mesh. And this time we're going to select the cylinder. Now let's go ahead and move towards our cylinder here, like so. And before we do anything to our cylinder here, you can see over on the bottom left of our screen, we've got these sorts of settings that we can change to our new object that we've created. So what we want to do here is we want to go ahead and reduce the vertices to 6. And then once we've done that, you can see as soon as we've done anything to this object, such as move it, that sort of option has now been removed. So make sure you've done any sort of changes like the vertices to our object before we move it. So now that we've got our object here, let's go ahead and press G and Z. I'm just going to move this up here. We're going to create, this will act as the basis of our lamp. So I'm just going to press S to scale and then Z to scale this down like so, and then I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate and then Z to move this down here. Now whilst I'm creating this lamp, I'm just going to hide all of these objects here so that we can focus purely on the creation of this lamp. I'm just going to make this slightly thinner, so S and then Z to thin this out. And then this I'm going to make slightly smaller, so I'm just going to press S to scale and then just scale it down like that. And then S to scale it again, and then Z to scale this up like so. So let's go to the side view here. I'm going to press G and then Z and move that into place. So S and Z, scale this, G and Z to move it. And I'm going to duplicate this top part. So press Shift D and then Z and then move that down. And then this will act as our lamp. And I'm just going to make a top part of our lamp here. So Shift D, Z, scale. So S to scale it. S, Z to scale it up a little bit. And then G and then Z here to bring that part down. So that will act as the top part of our lamp. Maybe a little bit taller, so S and then Z to make that a little bit taller like that. And then we'll also need a rope or a chain up there, so let's go ahead and duplicate this bit. So Shift D to duplicate, Z to move it up, and then scale down, and then S and then Z, and then just make that a little bit long like so. Cool. So now we've got our lamp here. We're going to need the wooden pole for our lamp to sit on, or to be placed on. So let's go ahead and press Shift and then right mouse button here. And I'm going to press Shift A and then let's create a new cube. And I'm going to scale this down. And let's go ahead and scale this in the X direction here. So S and X. GX to move this along here, and then let's go ahead and duplicate this. So press Shift D, and then from there, in fact before we duplicate it, let's go ahead and create some materials for this. So let's go back into our material preview mode and just select the wooden pole here. We're going to go to the materials, select this drop down box, and then just select wooden pole like so. And now let's go ahead and go to our side view, press Shift D to duplicate it. Just going to go back into our solid display mode, press R90. I'm just going to place this here scale it up just a little bit so that there's no overlapping of the polygons. Go back into our side view, and in fact that's a little bit too thick, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to press S and then Y to scale this in the y-axis, just to give it a little bit of breathing room, like there. And then go back into our side view here, S and then Z to make this a little bit longer. So G and Z to move this down. And then I'm going to duplicate this again, so Shift D, and then I'm going to press R and 45 to rotate that by 45 degrees. In fact, just go ahead and press R and rotate this like so. And then press S to scale it down, and then move that into place like so. Cool. And then the next thing we want to do here is we want to duplicate this again, so Shift D, and let's go ahead and move this in the X direction, and scale X to scale this down, and then just scale this up uniformly like so. S and X to make this a little bit thinner, then G and X to move this along, and this will act as the metal part of the pole which hangs our lamp. Cool. Then once you're happy with the way this looks, let's go back into material preview mode, and let's go and add a material to this. So I'm just going to delete that, and we'll add some materials to the lamp. So firstly, let's go ahead and reuse our metal material. So select that, and let's go ahead and select all of our metal objects here, and then let's see if we can add our metal. In fact, we have to do this individually, so let's go ahead and add a metal material to each of these objects like so. And then for this one, we're going to create a new material here. Let's call this light. Let's make this a bright yellow for now. Cool. So now that we've got our lamp created, the next thing we want to do is we want to create some stairs for our scene. Now before we start working on the stairs, let's go ahead and select all of these objects here, press M and move it into a new collection, and let's call this lamp. Click OK. And then from there, let's go ahead and bring the rest of our scene back in. So let's do that. And in fact, let's go ahead and place our lamp. So I'm just going to go into our top view, press G to move it. And then let's go ahead and press G and Z to move this up. And maybe just scale it down a bit. So I'm just going to press S to scale this down. And then press G and Z to move that down there, like so. Cool. And just maybe move that close to the house. Alright, so now that we've done that, let's go ahead and make these stairs. So I'm just going to borrow one of these poles here, press Shift D and then X to move this along here. I'm going to go into our side view here, press S to scale this up slightly just to make the pole a little bit bigger, and then S and Z to make this a little bit longer. Then I'm going to press R to rotate it, and just not too steep, just something like this. And then I'm going to go ahead and place this over here. Now, upon looking at the stairs, this might be a little bit too long, but now that we've rotated it, you'll see that if we now try and scale this in the Z-axis, it might start looking weird. So the way that we do this is we press S and then Z twice on the keyboard. In fact, let's go ahead and press S and then X twice on the keyboard, and you can see that we can now go ahead and scale this properly, like so. And then once we've done that, let's go ahead and scale this slightly on the Z axis as well. So S, Z twice, and then just make this a little bit thinner. In fact, S and Y to make this thinner, like that. Cool. Now we're going to go ahead and borrow one of these wooden planks. So I'm just going to go ahead and select one of these decks here. It's got an array modifier on it. So I'm just going to go to our top view, press Shift D to duplicate that. I'm going to remove the array modifier. I'm going to scale this down, press S and X to scale this down here like that. And this will act as one of our steps for our stairs. So I'm just going to press R and 90 to rotate it by 90 degrees and move that into place, like so. Cool. Now I want to make this into a different color. So I'm going to go to our material preview mode here, and I'm going to remove the material, go over to our material drop down box here, and I'm going to choose a wooden plank. So it's the same color as our house. Nice. And now if we go into our side view here, we can go ahead and add an array modifier. Let's go ahead and add 9 of these planks. Let's create the x-axis at 0. And we're just going to play about with the y and the z values here to create some nice steps. So I'm just going to go back into our solid display mode here. And just playing about with these values until we've got some nice stairs for our scene. Excellent. And you can see here we can go ahead and scale this down again. So S and then XX. Scale this down. Go back to our side view and then move this into place. SXX. And then move that into place. And then maybe rotate this slightly so that it matches the rest of our steps. And then from there, what we can do is we can add a modifier to this. So add a mirror modifier. Use the eyedropper tool to select the stairs and make sure it's along the x-axis, like so. So now you can see that we've got some nice stairs and a lamp added to our scene. Now to make our scene look a little bit more interesting, let's add another platform where our stairs are here. So I'm just going to go to our top view, press Shift D to duplicate our platform here. I'm just going to reduce the count of our platform here to something like 5, and then I'm going to scale this in the X to make a square wooden platform like so. Maybe about 6. S and then X to make this a little bit more square. And then back in our 3D mode, just going to press G and then Z to move this down, to move that platform down. And in fact, let's go ahead and add another value here, S and X, just to make it a little bit bigger. And then just move that into place. G and Z to move that up. And then from there, what we can do is we can also duplicate our lamp. So I'm just going to hide all of our values, all of our objects here. I'm just going to press highlight our lamp here, press Shift D on the keyboard to duplicate it, and then move this along the x-axis over here. I'm going to unhide all of our objects, and then over in the top view I'm just going to move this lamp into position, press R90 to rotate it, and then press G and then Z to move that down. Just move this along over here. Cool. And then next, let's go ahead and select our stairs. And we're going to duplicate that, so press Shift D to duplicate it. R and 90 to rotate it. Just move that into place. And then just press G and Z to move that down. Just like that. So now we've got a little bit more of an interesting scene to work with. In fact, let's go ahead and duplicate our lamp again. So press Shift D to duplicate it. I'm just going to add 2 lamps on either side of our stairs here. G and then Z to move that down. Cool.
Hopefully by now you should be starting to feel more confident with using the transform options and the array modifier. We'll be looking at how to add more realistic textures to our objects using box projection.
Now you can see here we've got this wooden plank model ready to place our texture on. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the shading workspace here. So click on that. And then over here you'll see that we've got this area here where we can add our nodes. So to add our texture, all we're going to do is we're going to right click in this empty space here. Make sure you haven't clicked on any of the other nodes here. So we're just going to right click, go to add texture, and then we're going to go to image texture. Click on the area here to place that. Then we're going to connect the color node to the base color here. And then you'll see automatically our plank here has changed to this black color, and that's because we haven't placed any texture on it. So let's go ahead and open up our texture. So we're going to go to open here to open the image, and then we're going to navigate to where you've placed your texture. So my texture is placed in this wooden texture folder here, and we're just going to choose one of these wooden textures. So open up that image, and you'll see straight away our texture has been placed on our object. Now we can go ahead and edit this in a few ways. So the first way to do this is we're going to again add something else. So we're going to go to add here, and then we're going to go to vector, and then we're going to go to mapping, place that in there. And then the next thing here, we're going to click on the empty space here. We're going to go to add, input, and then we're going to find texture coordinate. And then we're going to just go ahead and click and drag the vector node here to this vector here. And then we're going to go ahead and in the texture coordinate, we're going to click the object here and connect that to vector. Great. And now up here you can see that our texture is now appearing slightly differently. And that's because now we can use this mapping to go ahead and edit the way our texture looks. So let's go ahead and scale this up. And you'll see down here we've got these streaks, and that's because we've got a flat projection here. So we're going to change that to box. And now we can go ahead and change this, how the side looks. So I'm just going to increase that a little bit. And then we can go ahead and move that down. And just go ahead and change the way the scaling works here, and also the location of everything as well. So this is how we can change the way our texture looks. So I can go ahead and, so we don't want to rotate it. You can scale it on the X, scale it on the Y, and there we go. So now we've got a nice, clean, realistic wooden texture for our object. And you can do the same with other textures as well. So let's go ahead and open up another wooden texture, see what that looks like. Cool. Now these textures here were downloaded from Envato Elements, but feel free to use your own.
So recently I needed some realistic textures to use for a project just like this one. And if you're anything like me, scrolling through websites trying to find the perfect one can become a real nightmare. Well, That's where Envato comes in. With thousands of realistic textures and stock images available, I was able to save time and create different variations for my project with ease using these images. What I like about Envato is the ability to choose different categories to refine your search. It really is a great time saver and helps a lot when you're dealing with the dreaded creative block. The 3D models here are a great way to fill up your scene with creative assets, especially when you're short on time or need a bit of inspiration. So first let's head over to the website, envato.com, and then we'll hover over to the 3D button over at the top here, and then we're going to select Models, where you'll be taken to a section where you can browse the entire library of 3D assets. You can also filter some of the categories on the side here if you're looking for something in particular, such as file formats or themes. And if you know exactly what you want, you can always use the search bar over at the top here. So let's try and look for a low poly tree that we can use for our diorama project. And then once you've browsed through the offerings and found a tree that you want, simply click on the thumbnail to see more details about the model, and then simply click on the download button. Adding the 3D model to our project is simple. Head on over back to our project, and then we're just going to click on File and Import, and then choose either FBX or OBJ depending on the file type that you downloaded. Most models will come with a variety of different file types, so let's choose OBJ for example, and then just select the file that was downloaded from Envato Elements and select Import. And then from there you'll see that our tree has been successfully imported into our diorama to be used. In this next section, we'll be learning how to create a low poly scene. We'll begin by modeling key elements like the trees, rocks, and a tranquil pond.
Now let's go ahead and create the tree for our scene. So to do this, I'm just going to go into our top view here, press Shift and the right mouse button to move our 3D cursor, and this is where we're going to create our tree. In fact, let's go ahead and hide all of our objects here, just so that we can focus purely on creating our tree. I'm going to press Shift A whilst in object mode, and let's go ahead and select the cylinder to create a cylinder here.
Now, before you press anything else, we need to pay attention to the little toolbar at the bottom left of the screen here. This appears every time you create a new basic object, and if we open it up, it will display all the options that we can use to modify the base geometry of our object. However, we can only do this once. This can only be done when we first create the object and add it to the scene. As soon as we do anything else, such as move the object or click away or anything at all really, the toolbar will disappear, and we would have to create a new object again to get these options to show up.
And then from there, let's go ahead and make sure that the vertices are set to something like 8. And then just going to scale this up slightly. And then from there, we're going to make a cone. So I'm just going to go into front view here. And let's go to the wireframe view. And let's go to edit mode. Make sure that we have selected our vertex selection mode here. And I'm just going to select the top vertices, press S to scale, and then just scale them just down ever so slightly like that. And then I'm just going to press G and Z to move this cone down like that, just to make the top part of our tree. Next, let's go ahead and create some loop cuts. Select our loop cut tool here, and then we want to navigate over to our tool panel here, and let's increase the loop cuts number to 5. Hover over our cone here, and as soon as we click, you can see that we've created 5 loop cuts, like so. Excellent. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to add a loop cut just underneath some of these other loop cuts. So let's go ahead and decrease the loop cuts to 1. And I'm just going to move to this third loop cut here. I'm going to click and drag this loop cut down so that it's close to the third loop cut from the bottom. And then I'm going to do the same for this one here. So I'm just going to click, hold the mouse button, and then just move that ever so slightly down so that it's close to the third loop cut from the bottom here as well. Excellent. Now let's go ahead and shape our tree. Now to do this, we need to go over to our select box tool here, and we're going to select these vertices. Press and hold Shift on the keyboard to select these vertices here and the bottom ones. Now we're going to press S on the keyboard to scale them, and then you can see once we start scaling them, they sort of act a little bit weird, and we want each of these vertices to act on their own individual horizontal planes. So to do this, I'm just going to press Ctrl Z to undo that. We're going to go up here and we're going to change the transform pivot point to individual origins. So once we've done that, now that we've pressed S to scale and we scale them up, you can see now that this is a little bit more in line with what we want. So let's go ahead and scale these up like so. And we can do the same with these ones as well. So just scale them up slightly, scale this down a little bit more, scale this up a little bit, and then the same with these ones. Just scale them up ever so slightly. Maybe scale them down a little bit more just to add some shape to our tree. Cool. And then we can also do a little bit of scaling to these bottom ones here as well. So let's go ahead and select these two. Press S to scale and scale them down like that. And then once you're happy with the way that your tree looks, we can then shape this tree even more by selecting these two parts of the vertices here, and then we're going to press G to move them, and then press Z to move them up into the Z axis like so. Cool. And then if we go into our solid mode here, you can see how our tree is starting to take shape. Excellent. Now let's go ahead and go back into edit mode, and we're going to make the trunk of our tree. So to do that, let's go and select the bottom part of our tree here, press I on the keyboard to inset, and then we're just going to move the mouse. So press I to inset. So you want to make sure that your mouse cursor is a little bit further out, otherwise you'll come across the problem that I just did and you can't really do anything. So again, press I to inset, and we're just going to move the mouse down like this. So you can see we've got space for our tree to extrude from. And if we go ahead and press E to extrude, and then Z to extrude in the Z axis, we can now create this tree trunk here like so. So I'm just going to move this down in the Z axis just to make it a little bit longer, and then press S to scale to make it a little bit thicker at the bottom like that. Cool. So now that we've got the general shape of our tree, let's go ahead and select the vertex selection, and we want to merge the top of our tree here. So let's go ahead and press M to merge, and then select at center. So now we've got one nice point on our tree like so. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to add a little bit of randomness to the shape of our tree, as currently it's a little bit too uniform. So to do this, let's go back to our wireframe mode and go back to our front view, and we're going to select these vertices here, so the middle vertices like so, and then from there we're going to select proportional editing. And then what we're going to do from here, in fact, let's go back to solid mode. We're going to press R to rotate, and then Z to rotate in the Z axis. And you can see now that we can start to add a little bit of randomness to our tree. So you can see that what proportional editing does is that it affects the selected loops, the ones that we've selected and that are highlighted in orange, but it also affects the other loops as well, although not as much, depending on the fall off, the affected fall off size that we can affect using our mouse wheel. So let's go ahead and rotate our tree like that. And then if we want, we can also add a little bit of a lean for our tree as well. So if we press R to rotate, we can just rotate it a little bit like that. And then if we go over to the side, we can do the same. So just rotate ever so slightly on each of the sides of our tree, like that, just to give it a little bit of randomness, like so. So now we've got a little bit of a tree shape. Let's go ahead and, in fact, I just want to make our tree trunk a little bit thinner at the base. So I'm just going to select that, press S to scale, and just scale it down. Now you can see, because I've got proportional editing on, it sort of started to edit other loops as well. So I want to switch that off, press S to scale, and just scale the tree trunk down a little bit, like so. Cool. Once you're happy with the way that your tree looks, make sure to return to the median point, and then we'll start adding some color to our tree. Now to do that, we want to go ahead and select our polygons. So go to select mode here. I'm just going to go to wireframe mode, and let's go ahead and select the top part of our tree, like so. Go over to materials. We're going to add a new material here, and this will be called leaves. And for our leaves, we're going to choose a color, which is 5D 7F35, like so. And then if we go over to our materials, you can see that it's now been added. However, you can see that it has been applied to all of our tree when we only wanted it to be applied to the top half of our tree. So to do this, we need to add 2 material slots to our object. So just go ahead and click on add material slot here. And then for our trunk, let's go ahead and highlight the trunk. So just go to wireframe mode to make sure that we've highlighted all of the trunk here. Go back to material preview mode, and then we're going to go ahead and make sure that the new material is selected here, and we're just going to go ahead and choose wooden pole and then select assign. And you can see that now the wood has been assigned to our selection, and then the tree leaves has been assigned to our top selection, like so. Excellent. So now let's go ahead and bring in the rest of our scene, and then we can go ahead and go back into object mode and scale our tree to make sure that it fits in with the rest of our scene. So I'm just going to scale it up a little bit as well to make it a little bit taller.
So now that we have our tree ready, the next thing that we'll need to help fill out our scene is some rocks. In this lesson, we'll model rocks so that we have some variation when it comes to placing them into our scene.
To start creating the low poly rock, I'm going to hold Shift on the keyboard and press on the right mouse button to move the 3D cursor. Again, this is where I want the rock to be placed. I'm going to press Shift and A on the keyboard, and this time I'm going to choose an icosphere. Now, in order to make sure that the icosphere poly count is low, make sure that you've set the subdivisions here to 1. And then once you've done that, we can go ahead and scale the icosphere up. Now, once you've scaled it up, we can't change the subdivisions. So make sure that you've set the subdivisions to 1 before doing anything else. Now to focus on the rock, let's go ahead and hide the rest of our scene. And in fact, let's go ahead and move this tree to a new collection and call it trees. Hit OK. And then we can hide our tree here as well. Excellent. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to go into edit mode to start editing our rock. So go over here, go to edit mode. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to scale this rock here. So make sure that you've selected the icosphere first. So I'm just going to scale this up. So scale in the Z-axis just to make it a little bit longer. And we're going to learn two basic moves for editing this rock. Now the first thing we're going to learn is how to bevel these vertices. So usually when you bevel a vertice, you go ahead and select something, press Ctrl B to bevel. But as you can see, if we move our cursor around, it's not really doing anything. So if we go ahead and press V for vertex, you can now see that we are beveling the vertex. So we can go ahead and do that. Now, an easier way to do this as well is if we go ahead and select a vertex, we can go ahead and press Control, Shift, and B, and that will do the same thing. Cool. Now, the next important thing to learn is called edge sliding. So to do this, we're going to select a vertice here, and we're going to press G, G. And you can see now we can move the vertice along an edge like so to meet another vertice. Now, if I go ahead and select this vertice and press G again, you can see that those vertices have not merged. So in order to merge these vertices together, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and select this button here, which auto merges the vertices when they close together. So let's go ahead and select that vertice again, press GG, and now once we've placed those vertices together, if I go ahead and move that vertice, you can see that they have been merged together. Cool. So let's go ahead and use these techniques here to create our rock. So you can go ahead and edge slide these vertices like so, or bevel them by going ahead and pressing Ctrl Shift B to bevel. So just going around. In fact, let's go ahead and do that to the top and the bottom of our rock so that it's not so pointy. And then from there, start edge sliding our vertices to make something a little bit more interesting. Like so. So just edge sliding these vertices around, or beveling like that. Cool. So just going to move that down here. And you can just also just move vertices around to see what the rock looks like. Cool. And we're just going to make a few of these to populate the rest of our scene. Now you can see here as I move around the rock, there are some weird shapes that are starting to happen. So you do have to keep in mind how you want to change the shape of the rock. So make sure that the shape makes sense and doesn't have any of these weird indentations. And then once you're happy with the way that the rock works, or the way it looks, you can go ahead and make another one. So in here you can see that I've added or created a couple more rocks here for our collection. Once you're happy with the way that your rock looks, the next thing we want to do is add a material to color them in. So let's go into our material preview mode here, and we're going to add a new material, and let's call this rocks. And the color for our rocks here is going to be 888271. So once you've entered that in, we can go ahead and select the other rock here, and then just simply add them in from the drop down menu. Excellent. So now we've got 3 different rocks. We can go ahead and place them around the scene to populate it.
So now that we have all of our 3D props ready, we need some land for everything to sit on.
So to do this, we need to create an icosphere. So firstly, let's go ahead and press Shift and the right mouse button to move our 3D cursor away from the object that we created over there, just so we can see what we are creating. Press Shift and A on the keyboard, go to Mesh, and then select icosphere. Let's go ahead and zoom in to what we are creating. And now in the toolbar over at the bottom left here, we want to increase these subdivisions a little bit to something like 3. And then once we've done that, let's go ahead and press S on the keyboard, and you want to scale this object up all the way so that it can fit our treehouse and all of the objects within it. So I'm just going to go ahead and press on the top, the Z axis here, just so we can see the top of our scene. And let's go ahead and scale this island all the way up so that it can fit everything inside it. Just go to our front view here and just going to press G and Z to move it down. Now you can see that so far all we have is a globe. So we want to flatten and edit this object so that it becomes an island. So to do this, let's go ahead and move this up so we can just move it away from all of our other objects. We want to go into edit mode here. And then from here, we want to click on the wireframe display. And we want to go into our front view and make sure we've got the select vertices selected here. So let's go ahead and click and drag with the mouse to highlight just under the top half of our sphere, maybe a little bit more, just like that. So we've selected the top part of our sphere, like so. And then from there, we want to go ahead and press S to scale, and then Z on the keyboard to move all of the axes down like that. And then press G and then Z to move them further down. Cool. Okay, so we've just flattened the top of our sphere. In fact, let's go ahead and flatten this even more. So we want it completely flat. So let's go ahead and make sure that it is flat like so. And then just move it down like that. Cool. And we can also do the same with the bottom half of our sphere as well. So press S on the keyboard and then Z, and then just flatten it slightly and then move it up. In fact, let's go ahead and scale it a little bit like that. And then press S and Z like so. Excellent. So now we have a little island for our objects to sit on. So let's go back into our solid display mode and press tab to go back into our object mode. And then let's just go ahead and go into our front view and move this into place. So just going ahead and press G and Z to move that into place. Let's see what that looks like. Maybe it's a little bit too big. So I'm just going to scale this down slightly. And then press G and Z to make sure that it is in line with our stairs and our lamps here. And now we've got that done, we can go ahead and place our trees and our rocks onto our island, like so. Cool. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and reduce the polygons even further for our island, just to make it a little bit more interesting. Let's go ahead and select it. Go to the Modifiers tab. We're going to add a modifier. Go to Generate, and we're going to select Decimate. Now let's go ahead and move the slider, the ratio slider here. And as you can see, as I move it, you can see that the island is starting to change shape. Now this will reduce the amount of polygons our object has and make it look a little bit more interesting. So let's just play about with the slider here until you're happy with the way it looks. And then once you've done that, you can apply it by clicking on the drop down box here and then hitting apply. Cool. Now, once you've done that, let's go ahead and do the same with the inner part of our island. So in fact, let's go ahead and hit Control Z, just so that we've still got our decimate option here. And I'm going to press Control or Shift D to duplicate, and then Z up here. And let's go ahead and create the outer part of our island. So I'm just going to scale this up slightly, like so. If I go to the top view here, you can see what that's starting to look like. And then let's go ahead and change the way that this one looks. So it's different from our inner island. Just scale this up a little bit more, and then move that up like so. So now we've got an outer and inner edge for our island, just to make it look a little bit more interesting. Cool. Now let's go back to the material preview mode, and we're going to start coloring our island in. So let's go ahead and select the inner part of our island here. Go to the Materials tab, select New, and let's go ahead and name this Inner or Island Inner. And for the color of this one, we're going to go to the Hex tab here, and we're going to input ACA351 for that. And then for the outer part of our island, let's go ahead and select that. Click on New to create a new material. And this one will be called Island Outer. And for the color of this one, let's double click on the base color here, go to Hex, and we're going to input a value of 523926. And you can see we've got a new color for that. You can just scale it slightly down, like so. Excellent.
So to start this lesson off, you'll notice that our scene is slightly below the sort of horizontal line here. So let's go ahead and go into our side view, and we're just going to select all of our objects here. We're just going to grab all the objects by pressing G on the keyboard, and then press Z on the keyboard here, so that we are only moving it on the Z axis. We're going to move everything up so that our island now is just above the horizontal plane, which is represented by this green line here. So now as I move out of the side view, you can see now that all these squares are now just below the island, which is exactly what we want. Cool. So now let's go ahead and create the water for our scene. So to do this, let's go into our top view by pressing the Z on the gizmo there. And I'm just going to move to the side of our island, press Shift and right click to move our 3D cursor. And then I'm going to press Shift and A, go to Mesh, and we're going to create a new cube. So this cube is going to form the
sort of basis of our water here. You can see that it's quite small compared to our island, but we're going to fix that. So let's go ahead and zoom into our cube here for now. And over on the right here, you can see that we've got this panel here, this transform panel, that we can use to edit the scale of our cube. Now, if you don't see this, just go ahead and press the N button on your keyboard to bring that up. Go to Item here, and then we're going to change the scale or the dimensions of our cube to the following. So for the X, we're going to change that to 25. For the Y, we'll change that to 25 as well. And you can see straight away that has changed the size of our cube. Just going to zoom out here. And then for the Z, instead of 1, we're going to change that to something like 4, just to give it a little bit of thickness. So just change that to 4 there. And now you can see that our cube has gotten a little bit bigger and a little bit thicker. Great. So now let's go ahead and switch over to edit mode by going over to the top here and clicking edit mode, or just pressing tab on the keyboard. And then we're going to cut this up so that it has some segments to this object, just so that we can create some sort of ripple effects and wave effects for our water. We need this sort of geometry, otherwise it's just going to be a plain flat cube. And to do this, we are going to go over to our loop cut tool here over on the left. And as you can see, as we hover over our cube, it sort of gives us an idea of how it's going to cut it. Now we want to cut this up into, let's say, 6 slices. So let's go over to the object properties. So let's go to the tool properties here. And we want to change the number of cuts here from 1 to 6. And now if we go ahead and click over our cube here, you can see straight away that it has changed into 6 cuts. So I'm just going to go back into object mode quickly, and I'm just going to move our cube just above the center horizontal line so we can see what we're doing, as these sort of squares here are getting a little bit distracting. So let's go back into edit mode. And we're going to cut across the cube here as well, like so. So just clicking over the cube once you're hovered over it with the loop cut, making sure that you've set the number of cuts to 6. And now you can see we've sort of subdivided our cube into these sort of slices, these sort of squared slices. Excellent. Now we're going to need a little bit more geometry than this to create the ripple effects for our water. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select the wireframe mode. I'm going to go to the side view here, and I'm just going to use our selection tool to select the top surface of our cube. I'm just going to change this select mode to polygons, so that you can see now we've selected the top polygons. Now, the reason why I went into wireframe mode is if we don't go into wireframe mode here and we just go to our side view and select the top over here, that only selects what we can see. So with wireframe mode selected, we can now select everything, and everything sort of through the cube as well. So make sure to go back to vertices. We're just going to select the top vertices, then go back to the plane. And now you can see we've got all of the top polygons selected. Now, once we've done that, let's go ahead and right click on the top of this, and we're going to select subdivide. And over on the bottom left here, you can see that we can subdivide this even further. So right now we're just subdividing the surface, or the surface squares, by 1. So we're just going to change this, and as you can see, as we continue to increase this number, the number of squares are increasing as well. So I'm just going to change this, let's say, to 6. And that seems to be a good number. Maybe even
9. Perhaps that's a bit too much. Let's go back to 6, and then we'll stop there. Excellent. So now that we've got the appropriate amount of geometry for the surface of the water, we need to go ahead and assign this to a surface. So let's go ahead and go to wireframe view again. Just go to side view by clicking on the gizmo over here. I'm going to select the vertex select mode to select all of these top vertices here. And then with that selected, go back to the face mode again. Now you can see we've got the top faces selected. Now I don't want all of these top faces selected, as I want to create a sort of nice border around here, just so that the water or this object keeps its cube-like shape. Otherwise, once we start deforming the water, especially as we get to the very edges, even the edges are going to get deformed and it's not going to look very nice. So in order to deselect the outermost sort of faces of this cube, what we're going to do is we're going to hold Control on the keyboard and press the minus button on the numpad, and you can see straight away the outermost faces of the cube have been deselected. And this is a good way to sort of increase or decrease a selection by pressing Control and the minus button to decrease a selection, like so, or Control and the plus button on the numpad to increase the selection. So right now we just want to select the inside selection of this cube. And then once we've gone and done that, we're going to go over to the data panel here, and we want to assign a vertex group to this selection. So over where it says vertex group, we're going to press the add vertex group button, and we're going to rename this group water surface. And then once we've done that, go ahead and click on the assign button here to assign this vertex group to the selection. And you can tell that it's been assigned by clicking out of the selection here. So we've got no selection. And then we're going to click on the select, and you can see it automatically selects our vertex group. So that's how you can tell that it has been saved. Cool. So now let's go back into the object mode. So let's deselect that, go back to object mode. And from here, we're going to add our surface modifier to this cube, just to give it that sort of wave and ripple effect. So let's go to the modifiers panel here, go to add modifier, go to deform, and then we're going to select displace. And you can see straight away it's sort of done this to our cube, but don't worry, we're going to fix all of that. First, we need to select our vertex group here. So go ahead and click on this and select the water surface. So now it's applying the deform or this sort of displace effect only to the selection of our water surface. And now let's go ahead and further edit this cube by creating the surface ripples. So to do this, we need to go ahead and create a new texture. And now to apply a texture to our water surface, we're going to go ahead and click on this button here to assign a new texture. So let's go ahead and click on that. And then once we've done that, we can go ahead and choose a texture. So over here where it says type, image or movie, this is where we can sort of add an image or a sort of movie to our selection here. But we're just going to go and use the pre-made ones. So let's go ahead and click on this, and we're going to choose one of these pre-made textures. So let's go ahead and click on clouds. And you can see straight away that it's created this sort of wavy effect on our surface. Now, under here, under the cloud options, we can change some of the options to adjust the way that it looks. So we can change this from a soft type to a hard type.
And let's go ahead and change the size of this. So you can see as we move this scale, that's how it sort of changes the look of our water. So I'm just going to change this to 0.06. See what that looks like. And then we can also change the depth of the water here as well. Now from there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to our modifiers panel here, and I'm going to change the strength to 0.5 just to make our water ripples a little bit more subtle, like that. Cool. Now you can see our water's really starting to take shape. Now before we go any further, let's go back into edit mode by clicking tab on the keyboard, or just going up here and going to edit mode. I'm going to go ahead and go back to our data panel here. I'm going to select our water surface, and I'm going to add more cuts to these squares. So we're going to triangulate the faces, and what this is going to do is it's going to add more geometry to the surface and just give our water a little bit more of a better look to it. So in order to do this, we're going to right click on this, and we're going to select triangulate faces. So now you can see on each of our selected squares there's another cut going across it. So if we go back to object mode, you can see now that how that has affected our water. Great. So now that we've got the geometry for our water created, let's go ahead and add this to the rest of our scene. So in order to do that, let's go back to the top view. You can see our water is just a little bit too small at the moment. So I'm just going to select this in object mode, press S on the keyboard to scale, and we're going to move the mouse just to scale it up so that it can cover the size of our scene. And then once we've done that, let's go back to the side view here. I'm just going to press G on the keyboard to grab it, and then just sort of move it in place just underneath the horizontal line here. So this is where the surface of the water is going to go. And then you can just continually just sort of scale it up and move it as you see fit. So let's bring that back down again. And then just go back to the top view here to make sure it's sort of placed in the middle of our scene. So our island is now situated in the middle of this sort of water here. Great.
In this lesson, we'll focus on the final elements to complete our scene. These last items are the pond and the pavement. Let's start with the pavement.
So in order to do this, let's go ahead and press Shift on the keyboard and click the right mouse button near where our pavement is going to be created, which is around here. And then I'm just going to zoom in here, press Shift A on the keyboard, go to Mesh and Cube. So starting off with this cute little cube here, we're just going to scale this up to the correct size. And then all it is a matter of pressing S on the keyboard, press Z on the keyboard again, and we're just going to scale it down. Just so that if I move it up here, you can see how it's just a thin cube that we're going to use to create the pavement. So just press G on the keyboard and Z to move it just below the surface of our floor here. And then from there, all we're going to do is we're going to go to the top view here. In fact, we're just going to move it just so that it's not going to overlap our lamps. And we're just going to press Shift D on the keyboard, X on the keyboard, so that we can move and duplicate our cube on the X axis. And then from there, we're just going to scale it on the X axis and make it a little bit more wide, like so. And then if we want to move it, press G and X on the keyboard again to move it a little bit more to the right. And then we're going to duplicate this cube again. So Shift D to duplicate it, and then press X to constrain the movement to the X axis. And then from there, we're going to press S and X to scale it on the X axis, and then just scale it to make it a little bit wider as well. So in fact, let's go ahead and scale this on the X axis too. So S and then X on the keyboard, and then make it a little bit thinner like that. So once you're happy with the way that it looks, we're just going to move these cubes a little bit closer together. And then we'll just continue doing that for the rest of our pavement. So let's go ahead and duplicate this one. And we're going to move it down here. And then for this one, we're going to press Shift D again to duplicate it. And this time what we're going to do is we're going to scale this down uniformly. In fact, instead of scaling it uniformly, because if we scale it uniformly, we'll also go ahead and scale the thickness of our shape or our object as well. So we don't want to do that. Just press S to scale, X on the keyboard to scale it on the X axis, and then S to scale, and then press Y on the keyboard to scale it on the Y axis. So just continuously doing that until we're happy with this size of our cube. And I'm just making a couple of new small ones to add a little bit of variety for our pavement. So I'll just add another one down here, again by pressing Shift D on the keyboard to duplicate. And then I'm just going to press S and then Y on the keyboard here just to make this a little bit taller. And if we want to scale it by smaller increments, just press and hold Shift on the keyboard so that you've got a little bit more control like that. So I'm just going to line that up here so the top and the bottom is aligned. I'm just going to duplicate another one of these, press Shift D on the keyboard and then X, and then just going to move it over here like that. So I'm just going to duplicate this small one again. So I'm just going to utilize this and press Shift D again to duplicate another. Press X to constrain it to the X axis and then move it over here. And then let's go ahead and duplicate one more. Press Shift D on the keyboard and this time press Y to constrain it to the Y axis and move it down here. And then from there, I'm just going to duplicate one of these big ones. So press Shift D on the keyboard and then just moving it here, and then perhaps scaling this down a little bit. So press S, then Y to scale this down. Press S and then X to make this a little bit smaller, and then press G to move that into place. Just aligning it with the sides of the other pavement pieces. And you can continue to duplicate these cubes like that to create a number of these pavement pieces and just create as many as you like. So I'm just going to leave it here for now and then move on to creating a small little pond just around here to fill up our scene. Now before we create the pond, let's go ahead and group all of these pavement objects together so that we keep our scene collection nice and tidy. So let's go ahead and select all of these pavement pieces by holding Shift on the keyboard and left clicking with the mouse. And then I'm going to press M on the keyboard here. We're going to select New Collection and we're just going to name this Pavement, like so. And then click OK. So now we've got over here a new collection called Pavement that we can go ahead and collapse. Excellent. And we can also go ahead and name our new objects here as well, our land objects. So this is land. Let's go ahead and just number this, land 01. And this one is land 02. And select both of these and press M on the keyboard, create a new collection, and we're just going to call this land. Click OK. And there we've done the same thing over there. Cool. Now before we go ahead and create the pond, let's go ahead and move our trees and rocks. So just going to the top view here and moving our rocks and our trees over to the side for now, as this is the area where we want to create the pond. Now, before we start editing our land here, we need to apply any modifiers that we've got on our object. Otherwise, the modifier will modify any edits that we make. So let's go ahead and do that. So in order to apply this decimate, we go over to this arrow here and hit apply. And now we can go back to edit mode and safely make any changes to our object. So now that we have applied any sort of deformations that we had on this land, we can safely go into edit mode by clicking tab or going over here. And now we can safely go ahead and make a shape for our pond. So to do this, we are going to use the knife tool, which is over on the left here. And what this does is this creates vertices and edges that we can use to sort of modify this geometry. So if we go ahead and click on this edge here, you can see how it has created a vertice, a new vertice on this edge. And if we go over to another edge, so let's go ahead and click over here, you can see that it's created another vertice and it's joined those two up with an edge. So we can also click inside a polygon like so to create a new vertice. And this is how we can go ahead and sort of join the dots to create a shape for our pond. So let's go ahead and continue doing that until we finish it up over here. And once you've joined the last and final vertice, just go ahead and click on the right mouse button to deselect that, and then press enter on your keyboard to finish it up. And if you want to modify the shape of your pond, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the top view by clicking on the Z here. Make sure that the select mode is set to vertex. Go over to the move tool and we can simply select the vertices and then just sort of move them around like so. So let's just go ahead and increase the size of our pond here like that. Just giving it a rounder shape. And be careful what you do when you move the vertices, because you don't want to move a vertice over another edge, as you'll start getting sort of errors in the polygon like that. So keep them within the polygon that you've created and then you should be safe. Great. So now that you are happy with the general shape of your pond, the next thing that you want to do is we want to sort of create an area inside it to add the water. So to do that, we're going to go over to the face select mode and we're just going to select all the polygons inside here by pressing Control on the keyboard and then hitting the left mouse button. And then from there, we're going to use the extrude region tool here to create the space. So just clicking and then dragging down on this yellow icon here to create the space, being careful not to drag too far down as that will go into the other object. So just around here should be fine. And then once we've done with that, we'll go over to the top view, press S on the keyboard to scale, and we're just going to scale the shape down a little bit to create a sort of nice slant to our pond here, so we can see the edges from every angle like so. So let's move it in a little bit more, and now you can see we've got a nice hole here for our water. Now to create the water for our pond, let's go out of edit mode by pressing tab on the keyboard or hitting this object mode here, and we're just going to go ahead and go back to the top view, hit shift on the keyboard and right click to change where our 3D cursor is, and we're going to press shift A on the keyboard here and add a plane. So this plane is going to act as the surface of our water for the pond. So let's go ahead and scale this up. So press S on the keyboard and then just moving our mouse to scale it. We're going to go to the top view here to make this a little bit easier. So pressing G to move it into place, press S on the keyboard, and then X to scale it along the X axis. Press S on the keyboard and then Y to scale it on the Y axis. And we just want to make sure it's covering the area of our pond here. And then press G on the keyboard and then Z to move it up like so. So we just want to make sure that the surface of the water is just below the hole like that. Great. And then we can go ahead and rename this plane pond like so. And if you want, we can also go ahead and grab this and put it into its own sort of collection. So we want to create a collection for the pond and the water. So let's go ahead and select the pond and the water by hitting Shift on the keyboard or Control and then selecting them. Press M on the keyboard here, new collection, and let's call this water. Click OK. And there we go. Now we've got a new collection for our pond and our water. For the next part of the tutorial, we're going to be creating some tree trunks for our tree house to sit on, as currently it's sort of floating in mid-air. So in order to do that, what we'll do is we'll create some new geometry. So let's go ahead and press Shift A to add a new mesh, and we're going to add a cylinder here. And let's go ahead and scale this up so that we can see it. And let's move this up as well. So G and Z to move this up. And in fact, let's go ahead and move it into place. So I'm just going to create our first tree trunk over here, where this platform is. And we want to move this down over here. And let's go ahead and just scale this. So in fact, yeah, let's go ahead and scale this up. So let's scale this up a little bit, or scale this in the Z so that it's touching our platform. And we can check this by going over in our side view. And you can see how this is now just embedded inside our platform like so. And now what we'll do from there is we'll go into our edit mode. And let's create some segments inside here. So let's go to Loop Cut. And we want to go over to Tool. And let's change this number of cuts to 8. And then hover over our object here and click on it. So now you can see we've got 8 segments here. And the reason why we want to do that is so that we can sort of taper the size of our tree trunk. So to do that, let's go over to wireframe mode, and let's get out of edit mode first, and then we're just going to move it over to the side here, just so there's no other distractions. And let's go over to edit mode now, go to the select vertices mode, and we're just going to select each of these vertices and then just scale them down. So starting from the bottom, press S to scale, and then just move it ever so slightly down like that. And then the same for this one, scaling this down. And for each segment, it's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. So just going to create each of these segments like that. And this will give us a lot of room for us to edit it as well. So if we decide we don't want it that small, we can go ahead and edit it a little bit more like that. And in fact, let's go ahead and scale this down a little bit like that. So it doesn't have to be perfect, just moving it like this. And then let's go back out of wireframe mode, go back to our side view. And then let's go to object mode, press grab, and then just move this back into place like that. And then once you're happy with the way that this looks, we're going to add a modifier to this. So let's go over to modifiers, and we're going to add a modifier. So with the tree trunk object selected, go to add modifier, generate, and then select decimate. And then we're just going to use the ratio here to slide this down until you're happy with the way that it looks. So I'm just going to slide this down to somewhere around 0.16 to 0.5, like that. Great. And then we're going to duplicate this tree trunk. So press Shift D on the keyboard, press Z, and then just move this up. And then what we're going to do from there is just going to press S on the keyboard here to scale this down, and then press S and Z to maybe scale this up slightly, just to give this a little bit of height. And then this will give the illusion that the tree is sort of popping out of this platform here. And if you want, we can just go back into edit mode as well and go to wireframe mode, and from there we can scale these segments even further like this, just to make the top a little bit thinner and to make it look a little bit more interesting. So once you've done that, let's get out of wireframe mode, press tab on the keyboard to have a look around, and we'll want to rotate this as well, just so that it doesn't look like it's been duplicated so much. So press G on the keyboard here, or in fact it's press R on the keyboard and then press Z. So R to rotate and then Z to rotate it on the Z axis, and then just sort of rotate it until you're happy with the way that it looks. Great. So now we can also create another tree stump just over here as well, just to make things a little bit more interesting. So let's press Shift and right click on this part of the land here, and then we're going to press Shift A on the keyboard to create a new mesh and a new cylinder. Now before we move this cylinder, we're going to go ahead and change some of the properties of our cylinder here. So this, at the moment, it's got a little bit too many sides here. So let's go ahead and press Ctrl Z to change that. So press Shift A on the keyboard and then create a new cylinder. And then let's go ahead and change the amount of sides by clicking down the vertices here. So somewhere around 20. And then let's go ahead and move this up. So GZ to move this up, and let's scale this up as well. So this will be our tree stump. And then just like what we did before, we're going to go back to edit mode, and we're going to create some loop cuts. So maybe not as many as 8. So let's go ahead and go for around 5. Click over our object here to create these loop cuts, and then we're going to go back into the side view here, and we're going to edit how this looks. So first of all, let's go ahead and so we need to go into wireframe mode in order to select all of the vertices and just move that up a little bit. So making sure we've got the select mode vertices here and select box, we're going to do exactly the same as what we did before, just selecting the top a few vertices here and then just scaling them down. So actually it's easier to start from the bottom here, so we've got a base to work with, and then we know how much we need to scale everything down by. So something like this, and then once you're happy with the way that looks, let's go back to our shaded view and go back to object mode by pressing tab on the keyboard, and then we're just going to press G, Z, move this down so that it touches our land. And then we're going to add the same modifier to this. So go ahead and add modifier, generate, and decimate. And again, just sliding the ratio down until you're happy with the way that it looks. We can also hit the triangulate button here, and you can see how that adds a little bit more geometry to our shape. Cool. So once you're happy with that tree stump, we can go ahead and add the main tree over where our tree house is. So let's go ahead and press Shift and right mouse button to select where we want our new tree stump or our new tree to be created. And then press Shift A, go to Mesh, and then hit Cylinder. Now for this one, we're going to want a few more vertices. So let's go ahead and make this 40. And then we're going to scale this right up. So scale this all the way up. Let's go to side view so we can see what this looks like. And then once you're happy with the size of our tree trunk, let's scale this down a little bit and then make it longer. So S and Z to make it longer. Going over to the back view, making sure that it's in the middle of our platform. And then once you're happy with that, let's go over to edit mode, and then we'll do the same. So go to loop cuts here, and going over to our tool, we're going to create just a few more loop cuts. So maybe somewhere around 10 should be fine. Click on our object, and then from there, it's going to be the same thing. So going over to side view, let's click on our wireframe mode here. Make sure that select box is the tool that you're using. And then we're just going to, starting from the bottom here, just scale these down to create the shape of our tree trunk. So going from one layer at a time, and then just tapering it down like so, until you get to the very top, like that. So now you can see we've got a nice tapered tree trunk here. Let's go back into object mode, and again using the modifiers tab, let's go to add modifier, generate, and then select decimate here. We can decrease the ratio here to give a nice sort of low poly look to our tree trunk. And then again, click on the triangulate button here to give it a little bit more interesting shapes. Okay, so from here actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into edit mode by going here, and then just going back into wireframe mode, going back into our side view. Just to make things a little bit more interesting, we're going to go to each of these and then just sort of move it to the side. So in fact, I'm going to do this from the back view. So just move this to the side a little bit, just to make things a little bit more interesting. Then over to this side. So it's just not just going up and down. We got a little bit more of an interesting shape. So you can see here that it's sort of zigzagging up there, and we can do that to this side view as well. So let's go ahead and move these along. Oh, in fact, make sure that you're always in wireframe mode so that you've selected all of the correct polygons. And we can go ahead and select a few more of these, just move them along like that. Great. So now that looks a little bit more interesting. Let's go back into object mode, and you can see how that has affected the look of our tree trunk. And just by looking at this, we might want to scale this up a little bit as well. So just pressing S on the keyboard and then press X to scale it this way, and then press S and then Y to scale it that way, just to make it a little bit thicker, like so. And then what we want to do from there is let's go ahead and duplicate this. So press Shift D on the keyboard to duplicate it. And as we're in the top view, we can just go ahead and rotate this round like that. Scale it down, press S and X to scale this like that. And we're just going to press S and Z to make it longer. Press G and Z to move this up. And we're just going to move this over to the side here, like that. Just to give our treehouse a little bit more of an interesting look. So press S and Z, scale this up, and then let's just move this down a little bit more. S and Z, and there we go. Cool. So just having a play with how we can create some interesting shapes for our tree trunk. We can also do the same for our previous tree trunks here as well. So let's go ahead and do that. So going over to our side view, go to wireframe mode, and then go to edit mode here. And then let's just move these ever so slightly. So G, and then just moving them to the side. So pressing G to move those to the side. Press G and move those to the side there. And then just press Alt and the middle mouse button to make sure that you're focused on this one tree trunk here. Then moving over to the side here, we're just going to press G to move those to the side, and G to move these to the side slightly. And then hopefully you can see that's made this tree trunk look a little bit more interesting. And the same for this one. Press Alt and middle mouse button to focus on this tree trunk here. Press Tab on the keyboard to go to edit mode, go to wireframe, go to side view, and we're just going to select a few of these vertices and then just moving them to the side, moving them to the side there, and then going over to this view here, this side, select those and move them to the side there like that, and moving these to the side there like that. Okay, back to object mode, and there you have it. Some interesting looking tree trunks.
Now that we have all of our objects for our scene created, let's go ahead and place them on our island and create the scene. It's time to arrange everything so that we've got a nice looking diorama for our render. So let's go ahead and do this first by sort of duplicating these trees and rocks and then just sort of moving them around to create something a little bit more interesting. So let's go ahead and do the trees first. So I'm just going to select the tree, going over to our top view, press Shift D to duplicate it. I'm just going to move a tree over here like so. And then every time you duplicate something, make sure to sort of rotate it around so that it doesn't look exactly like the duplicate that we had over there. So let's go ahead and move this a little bit over here and then just going to scale it down slightly like that. Press G on the keyboard and then Z to move it down like so. Cool. And in fact, let's go ahead and scale this up again. Press G and Z like that. And then from there, I'm just going to scale this tree up. So just going to scale this up slightly. Press G and Z to move this up, and then maybe move this further forward. So let's go ahead and move these rocks over to the side for now, just concentrating on where we should place these trees. So press S and then Z to scale this in the Z axis, just to make this tree a little bit taller, like so. And then move this forward slightly, and then press Shift and D to duplicate a new one. Rotate this around,
and then scale this down, and then G and Z to move this down like that. And let's go ahead and move this closer over here, and then press Shift D to create another tree, and then maybe let's scale this up, and we want to rotate it, so let's rotate this around a little bit more, and then press G and Z to move this up like that. Cool, so now we've got a nice group of trees over on the left here. Let's go ahead and do the same with the right side. So let's press Shift and D to move this tree over there and rotate this around. And you can see I keep moving to this sort of angle here with the mouse, and this is because this is the angle of the final render that I want to create. So I keep creating, or just moving the mouse or the scene back here just to see what it looks like. So I'm just going to scale this down a little bit, G and Z to move this down. So every time I'm moving these objects, I'm keeping in mind how this will look in the final render, which is over here. So going back to the top view, press Shift D, rotate, and then scale this up. And then just G and Z to move this up here. Now maybe that's a little bit too big, so let's scale this down, G and Z, move that down there like that. And then maybe we want one more tree poking out of the side here, so let's go ahead and create one more here, rotate it round, and maybe let's scale this in the Z. So S and then Z, scale this up, R and Z to rotate it, and then just move this up a little bit like so, and then just see what that looks like. Cool. Now this is a little bit too uniform, so I'm just going to move this tree further this way and that tree further that way, just so that it makes it look a little bit more interesting. So move these two closer together like that. Great, so we've got some nice spacing here, and it doesn't look like they are the same tree just sort of moving upwards like that. So now we've got some trees here. Let's go ahead and add one more tree or a couple more trees around the back to make it look like this tree house is part of a forest. So I'm just going to scale this up a little bit more. G and Z, moving this up. And then maybe one more tree as well. So Shift D, scale this a little bit down. And rotate this. And let's press G and Z like that. Maybe scale this a little bit more like this. Cool. So now we've got a mini forest surrounding our tree house here like that. Next, let's go ahead and add some of these rocks here as well. So just bring these rocks back in. So go back to our top view. I'm going to start with this rock, press G, and then let's go ahead and scale this up. And I'm just going to go to our side view and rotate this round like that. Scale this up and just move this just underneath our tree house here. Let's grab another rock here, scale this up, rotate it, just place it next to that rock here, and our final rock, let's place that there and scale it up. So we've got a nice little rock formation going on here. And then we can do the same with inside our pond. So I'm just going to duplicate one of these rocks. So press Shift D on the keyboard to duplicate. Scale this down, rotate it. And let's go ahead and move this into our pond. So G and Z here like that. And the same with this one. So go back to our top view, press Shift D, rotate it round, scale it right down, and just zooming into our pond here, just going to move this inside our pond like that. So we've got some nice rocks inside our pond. Just going to move them close to the edge so it looks more natural. And then let's go ahead and add some more rock formations. So I'm just going to duplicate these two and rotate these round like this, scale them down, or maybe just scale them up. Move them over here so they're close to this tree. And now I'm just going to duplicate or rotate this on the side like that. Just flip it round so we've got a different looking rock from what we've got in the pond like that. And then we can go ahead and duplicate this, rotate it, scale it down to create another rock formation. Cool. And now let's go ahead and create one more rock formation over here. So let's go ahead and duplicate this rock, rotate it, maybe even on the side a little bit more like that. And then let's grab one of these rocks here that we haven't used, scale this down, rotate it. Let's see, somewhere around here, scale it down, and then grab one of these small rocks and place it there. Cool. So we've got 3 rock formations. Maybe this one's a little bit too big. Just scaling that down, moving each of these to the side. Oop. And always referencing our camera view to see what that looks like. And just move them down here. And then what we want to do is we want to add some rock formations inside the water as well, just to make things look a little bit more interesting. So duplicating this rock, scaling it up, and let's go ahead and rotate this upside down again. And then press G and Z to move this down into the water. Okay, so let's do the same with another rock. Shift D, scale it up, rotate it, and then G and Z to move that into the water like so. I'm just going to create a few of these. To make our water look a little bit more interesting. And then maybe a couple more here as well. So rotating them around just to add some variety to the look of all of our rocks. So Shift and D, scale, rotate, and then just sinking it down here like that. Cool. Great. So now we've got some rock formations. Let's go ahead and use this tree stump as well and duplicate this around. So I'm just going to scale this up slightly. Make sure it's still connected to the land and moving this close to behind this formation here. Yep, like that. And let's go ahead and duplicate this and move this round to this, close to this formation here as well. And then press R to rotate, Z on the keyboard here to rotate it around. And then let's go ahead and add another stump around here, scale this down maybe, and then rotate it. Cool.
Now that we have the whole scene ready, it's time to move on to the camera setup.
So let's go ahead and add a camera by pressing Shift A on the keyboard, and then we're going to move down to camera. Great. Now with the camera object selected, you can see we've got two cameras here. This is because the first camera was what came with the default part of the scene, so we can go ahead and remove that and select the camera that we've just created. And I'm just going to rename this camera. Great. So with this camera object selected, we need to insert some values for the position and the rotation of the camera. So to do this, remember to press N on the keyboard to bring up this transform menu here. And now we can go ahead and add the following. So for transform on the location, we want to make the X value 30.609, and then the Y value, we want to make this minus 30.609. And then for the Z value here, let's go ahead and make this 30.609. Great. And now for the rotation here, we're going to change the rotation to 54.7 degrees. The Y value, we want to change this to 0 degrees. And for the Z value, let's change this to 45 degrees. And then once we've done that, our camera is pretty much set up, and we can go ahead and click on the camera view button, which is on the right here, to have a look at what this looks like. Now, an easy way to zoom out from here is to go ahead and select the view panel here. So remember to press N on the keyboard to bring this up. And under view lock, we want to go ahead and select camera to view, which enables the navigation as if we were using it previously through our viewport. So what we can do from here is, now with that selected, is to use the mouse wheel to slowly zoom out of our project like so. And then also we can still use the pan commands, like pressing shift on the keyboard and holding the mouse button down to move the camera to a position that we like. So somewhere around here, like that. Great. And now from there, what we can do is we can also use the extra camera option. So just go ahead and click on the green camera icon here to bring up this new camera panel, which is data. And from there, we can go ahead and increase or decrease the focal length of our camera, or change it from perspective, which is a more natural view, to something like orthographic, which is a more isometric view. Now you can see it's zoomed in again. So what we'll have to do is we have to zoom out using the orthographic scale, like so. So just zooming out all the way here, and you can see we've got a nice isometric design for our scene. Great. Now from here you can see, using our camera, we've got some slight inconsistencies here. So we've got some holes in our water here. So just go ahead and select the water, and you can remove those by just sort of scaling the water up so that it fills the space in our camera. Now, as you can see, this space here indicates what we'll be rendering. So this is the final space for our render, and we can change the aspect ratio of our camera by going over to the output properties here, and you can see its default is set to 1920 by 1080. But if we wanted something a little bit more square, so we can cut off these empty parts of the water here, we can go over to the X axis here and then just sort of change the aspect ratio. So maybe something like 1080 by 1080, and then we can go ahead and zoom in from there. So remember, we need to lock the camera to view. In fact, because our camera is set to orthographic, we'll need to go back to our camera option here, which is our data panel, and then just zoom in like that. And now you can see we've got a nice square composition for our design.
Lighting is the final step to creating our image. In this chapter, we'll use lighting to set the mood, enhance the atmosphere, and bring the scene to life.
So now that we have everything set up, let's go ahead and begin by adding some lighting to our scene. So we'll start by adding a sunlight to the scene by pressing Shift A on the keyboard to add a new object. And this time we're going to scroll over here to Light and select Sun. From there, we're going to press G on the keyboard to grab the sunlight object, and then press Z to lock the movements to the Z axis and move it above our scene, like so. Great. Now we'll use this as our fill light, which is the main source of light in our scene. Now, because we are currently in this solid display mode, we can't really see how the light is affecting our scene. We'll need to move over to one of these two options here, which is either the material preview mode or the rendered mode, which, if you remember from our previous lessons, will display more accurately the final version of our render. So let's go ahead and click on the rendered display mode here to see what it looks like. And you can see with our sunlight here, you can see straight away how it is affecting our scene. So let's go ahead and go over to the render properties here. And right now it has been set to Eevee, but we want to go ahead and change that. Now, before we do that, let's go ahead and make some changes to our light first. So first of all, let's go ahead and make sure that our sun is selected here, and we're going to change the transform pivot point here to 3D cursor. And what this will do is this will give us the maximum amount of freedom with our lighting in our scene. So to change the way the lighting works, let's go ahead and press R and then R again on the keyboard, and you can see as I move my mouse, we can go ahead and change how the sun is casting its light on our scene like this. So you can see how we can point it in any sort of direction that we want, which is kind of cool. But for this tutorial, we'll be going ahead and we'll stick with some rotation values just to keep things simple. So I'm just going to go ahead and press Ctrl Z on the keyboard here to undo all of that. And over on the transform panel here, we're going to go to the item, and we're going to change some of these rotational values here. So for the X value, we'll change this to 45 degrees. We'll keep Y on the 0 degrees, and then we'll change the Z value here to minus 45 degrees, like so. And this will give us some nice shadows for our scene. So you can see how the light is coming from the top left, and then just sort of casting the shadows over to the right, which gives us some nice lighting on the left and some nice shadows on the right. Excellent. Now, to check the lights, make sure that we are in rendered shading view, and you might find that the lights are a little bit dark or that they need some adjustments. So to do this, let's go ahead and go over to the Object Data Properties tab here. So let's go to this over here, and let's go ahead and adjust some of these options. So for the color, we'll change the color here to a new hex code, which will be DDCEAD. Go ahead and change that. And then for the strength, we want to change this from 1 to 2, which automatically makes things brighter. And then for an angle, we want to change the angle here to 40 degrees. And you can see how that sort of softened some of the shadows here. Now, in order to make any more changes to our light, we're going to need to change our renderer from Eevee to cycles. So let's go back to our render tab here and change the render engine from Eevee up here to cycles. And you can see how automatically it changes the look of our scene, so it looks a little bit more realistic, or the lighting is a little bit more realistic. Great.
Now let's change the device from CPU to GPU. And as we do this, you might notice that there are some dots or noise in the scene. And this occurs because Cycles is based off of ray tracing technology. Now, when we render an image in Blender using the Cycles engine, we're essentially simulating how light bounces around our scene. But to get a clearer picture, Blender needs to take a lot of these samples or measurements of how light behaves in each pixel. So sometimes Blender might not take enough samples, especially when we're in a hurry or working with limited computer power. So when this happens, the picture isn't quite as clear as it could be. And that's why we get this noise effect or these sort of dots on the screen. So in order to fix this, we need to go under the sampling options here. And we need to open the viewport setting, which is under here. And we can go ahead and click on this small little option here called denoise. Great. And make sure that we can do the same under rendering as well. So under render, you can go ahead and click on the denoise option. And this feature in Blender reduces the amount of noise or graininess inside these rendered images, which gives our picture a much smoother and cleaner look. Great. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and continue editing our light. So go back to the data properties here. And we can go ahead and continue to change some of these properties. So now you can see that we've got an option for max bounces. We want to change this to 1024. So once you've done that, let's move over to the World Properties tab over here. Click on that. And from here, what we're going to do is we're going to change the color of our overall world to make things a little bit cooler. Now, as you can see, the color is currently set to gray, which is why we have this sort of gray looking light shining in our scene here. So if we go over and click on this color here, and let's go ahead and change the color. So we're going to use a color which is 9BB4DA. Go ahead and enter that. And you can see straight away using this light blue color, the scene appears a lot brighter. Now you can experiment with the colors here, and to change you can see as I use the color wheel, you can see how this affects and changes the look of our image. And because I've chosen this blue light here, you can see how this sort of changes, it has this effect with our warm lights in our scene, and it really helps balance things out. So saying that, let's go ahead and add a few more warm lights to our scene. So to do this, go ahead and press Shift A on the keyboard, and we're going to go ahead and go to light and then select area, and this will add an area light to our scene. Let's go ahead and press G and move it up the same way that we did with our sunlight. And now let's go over to the Object Data Properties tab and adjust it. So for the color, let's go ahead and change this color to DDCEAD. Hit enter to apply that. And then for the power here, we're going to change this to 2000 watts. And then just pressing the G button on the keyboard to move that into place. I'm just going to move that above our house here and change the size of our area light just so that it warms up that area on top of our house. Great. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and add the materials or the missing materials that we've got all over our scene here. So to begin with, let's go ahead and start with the water. So let's go ahead and click on our water here. And then over down here in the materials tab, we want to go ahead and click on this. And we want to create a new material. So let's go ahead and press on the add material slot here, and then add a new material by clicking on this new material button here. And we're going to rename this material water. So let's go ahead and double click on that and rename this water. And
from there, let's go ahead and change the following options. So for the surface, we're going to keep this at principal BSDF. And for the base color, let's go ahead and change this. And the hex code we're going to use for the water is 6DD4F3. Go ahead and press enter to change that. And you can see straight away, it's changed the color of our water to a blue here. Now in the metallic properties here, we're going to change this to 0.131. And then for the roughness, we're going to put this all the way down to 0. So you can see now our water is starting to look a little bit more shiny. And then for the IOR, we're going to change this to 1.333. And the alpha, will keep that at 1. And then over down here, for the specular, let's change this to GGX. And the IOR level, will keep this at 0.5, and the tint kept at white. And this is the look of our water. From there, let's go ahead and select the pond water here, and we want to use the same material that we used for the water. So over in the material panel, all we need to do is select the material. So let's go ahead and browse the materials here and make sure we select water to change it. Great. Next up is the tree trunks. So we're going to use the same color that we used for our trees here. So I'm just going to select this tree, and under here we can see that we used the wooden pole material for our tree trunk. So let's go ahead and add that. So starting over from the left, let's select this tree trunk here, and let's go to our materials panel and make sure that we select the right material. So wooden pole is selected here, and you can see straight away that's applied to that tree trunk. So we'll do the same for this stump here, choose wooden pole, and then over here we'll do the same, select wooden pole for each of these tree trunks, and we'll just go around and make sure that has been applied to all of the tree trunks like that. Excellent. And then finally, what's left is the stone pavements here. So we can go ahead and select one of these, and let's create a new material for this as well. So let's add a new material slot, create a new material, and let's name this stone pavement. And let's change this color here. So double click on this, and we'll just choose a slightly lighter gray color, just tinted towards the blue, like so. And then we'll go ahead and apply it to the rest of the stone pavement objects. So let's go ahead and do that. In fact, once I've taken a look at this, I can see that the blue is just a little bit too strong. So let's go ahead and desaturate that a little bit more, like this, because we've got a blue light already, so that's going to make that a bit too strong. So now that we've desaturated that, let's go ahead and let's make sure that the stone pavement material has been added to all of our individual stone pavements, like so. So we can go ahead and zoom in here to see what this looks like. And zooming in also makes it a little bit easier to navigate and to look and to select these pavements as well. Great. So having a look at these pavements, I can see that maybe they're just a tad too small. So I'm just going to select them all here, press S on the scale. I'm just going to scale these up ever so slightly, and then press G and then X to move them back into position. GX and then GY, like that. Cool. And now let's go ahead and zoom out to see what that looks like. Great. In fact, let's go ahead and make the stone pavements just a little bit warmer, like that. So just bring it back down into the yellows, and there we have it.
So now that we know how to add lights to the scene, let's go ahead and play about with that. You can continue to add more area lights like this one to continue adding more areas of warm light to the scene. Or let's go ahead and add another sunlight so that we can cast some harder shadows to our scene. So let's go ahead and do this. So press Control or Shift A on the keyboard and add a new sunlight here. And from there, let's go ahead and press R and R to angle our sunlight a little bit more to the top like this. So just angling it and playing about with where it's going to be to add some light and some nice shadows to our scene. Great. So once we've done that, let's go ahead and change the strength of our sunlight. So let's try 3 to see what that looks like. And then let's choose a nice warm color for that. So let's go ahead and bring this to something, one of these orange colors here. And in fact, let's go ahead and let's bring the sunlight up to something like 5 or 6. And then maybe press RR again to reposition the shadows a little bit, like so. Or maybe just bring some more light over on the left here. So let's bring this up, maybe 7, to see what it looks like. Great. So now our scene is really starting to take shape. Let's go ahead and make a few adjustments to the way this looks. So I'm not quite happy with the way the water is looking at the moment. So I'm just going to select the water, go back to the materials panel here, and I'm just going to change the base color here and saturate that blue a little bit more, like so, just to bring the color of the blue out just a little bit more. Great. Then from there, let's go ahead and zoom in to our house here. And I'm just going to go ahead and select the windows. And from there, let's go ahead and change the color of the windows to something warmer for now, something like yellow. And then we're going to go over to the emissions panel here, and we're going to change this to yellow. And we're going to change the strength up a little bit. So something like 2.5, or maybe even, let's go for 3, just to add a little bit of lighting to our scene, like that. And we can do the same for our lamp. So let's go ahead and click on the lamp light here. Let's go over to the emissions here, change the color to yellow, and then just change the strength to 3, or because this is a lamp, let's make it even brighter, so something like 5, and see if we can crank this up even more, see what that looks like. And you can see how that light is starting to affect the rest of the scene as well. So we can crank this up to, let's say, 100 and see what that looks like. Cool. And because this material has been added to the other lamps as well, you can see straight away those have been affected too. Great. And now from there, we don't want the top of our tree trunk to appear like that. We want to tighten up the composition here just a little bit more. So let's go back to our camera and let's go to the scale here and then just zoom in just a little bit closer like that, just to tighten up our composition a little bit, and then just maybe tighten it up just a little bit more like that, and then let's shift it up. We can use these shift buttons here, these scale options here, just to move it to the left or move it to the right. So let's move it and center it just a little bit more like that. Excellent. So you can continue adjusting your scene like this until you're happy with the way that it looks. And then once you're happy with that, let's go ahead and go over to rendering the scene. So rendering is where the magic happens, transforming our digital creations into stunning images or animations. So now that we have everything finally set up, let's go ahead and go through some final adjustments before we do that. So let's go to the render tab here, the render properties here. And we want to go all the way down here to color management. So let's open up color management. And over here where it says look, we want to change the look from none to medium or high contrast. So you can see straight away it makes our image look a little bit better. So you can see medium, high contrast here, or even high contrast, which brings the contrast in even more. So I'm just going to keep this at medium, high contrast for now. And then for the exposure, let's go ahead and change this to something like 0.7. Bring this a little bit down. So maybe something like 0.3. So we can continue to adjust this until we're happy with the way that it looks. So I've kept this at 0.4. And then from there, you can see how this affects your image and gives it a little bit more depth and makes it stand out a little bit more. So you get deeper shadows and brighter highlights, making your image really pop. So depending on the style of your image, let's just have a play with these options here and see how it can affect the look of your scene before rendering. Rendering is where the magic happens, transforming our digital creations into stunning images or animations. Now that we have everything finally set up, it's time to render our final image. So once you're ready, go over to the Output tab, which is over here. And we want to make sure that you're saving your file in the right format. So for this tutorial, we're going to keep this at PNG or JPEG. So you can see here under file format, we can change this to PNG or JPEG. So let's go ahead and switch it to JPEG for now, so you can see what that looks like. And then we want to click on the file icon, which is over here, to go ahead and choose the destination of where you want to save it. So right now it's going to be saved under my temporary folder, but if you click on this, you can go ahead and choose where you want to save it. You can also do this in the rendering workspace, which is over at the top here. So let's go ahead and click on that. Here you can also choose the resolution of your file, as well as the previous options here for output. So you can see here where you want to put your file and also the file format. Once you're ready, we're ready to go and render our image. So to do that, let's go ahead and click on render and then render image, or F12 on the keyboard. Wait for a bit until the render is finished, and there you go. Now once your image has finally been rendered, remember to save it by going to image here and selecting either the save or save as options. And there you have it! From the very basics of Blender to mastering a modular, low poly scene. Throughout the course, we've gone through all the ins and outs of Blender, from basic modeling to adding color using materials to adding lighting in your scene. All this gives you a strong foundation to continue your 3D journey. So congratulations on completing this Blender course for beginners. And remember, your journey as a 3D artist is only just beginning. Happy blending, and I'll see you next time.